Today we're reading The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence by Michael D'Antonio. This is from the first chapter. For decades, Pence had presented himself as a humble servant who could be entrusted with power because he was at heart a mild-mannered Midwesterner. Friends and foes alike said his major character trait was extreme niceness. When given the opportunity, Pence described himself as a true Hoosier, son of Indiana, who was a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. This is how he had introduced himself to the country at the Republican National Convention 6 months earlier. The list contrasted with the usual pledge politicians make to put country first. This is what President Obama did after the 2016 election when he said, "We are not Democrats first, we are not Republicans first, we are Americans first." The vice president's self-declared identity revealed both his priorities and the source of his power. For 30 years, he had helped lead the Republican Party into a closer alliance with preachers who were turning evangelical Christianity from a religion into a political crusade that engaged in a culture war with non-believers. The aim of many was to destroy abortion rights, roll back the equality gained by gay citizens, and prepare the nation for the second coming of Christ. Pence and others used martial metaphors and considered themselves warriors of the Christian right, both besieged and called upon to fight. Quote, "Those who would have us ignore the battle being fought over life, marriage, and religious liberty have forgotten the lessons of history," said Pence in 2010. "America's darkest moments have come when economic arguments trumped moral principles." Pence's allies in his war included hugely wealthy donors who, despite their vast wealth accumulated at a time of historic inequality, also posed as victims. As libertarians in the mold of Ayn Rand's cardboard characters, they felt inhibited in the pursuit of even greater riches by a government that imposed foolish regulations and would redistribute their wealth to the supposedly indolent poor. Starting with this perspective, they denied the science behind environmental protection, demanded tax cuts for themselves, and insisted on massive reductions in programs serving anyone who wasn't rich. The victimhood claimed by both the libertarians and the Christian right permitted the construction of an alternative reality that denied their own power and masked their ambition to make politics and culture conform to an ideology that included white Christian supremacy and predatory capitalism. It also denied the progress they had made in their construction of their own political might. With his oath of office, Vice President Pence became both the free marketer's hero and the most successful Christian supremacist in American history. Most of Pence's life had been preparation for this moment, and possibly one more. His lifelong goal, set when he was a boy, was the Oval Office itself. Remarkably, he had reached this point by tying his fate to Donald J. Trump, a man whose immorality in the form of lying, cheating, and deceiving in every aspect of his life, from his marriage to his businesses, had made him a living exemplar of everything that Christianity and conservatism abhorred. However, this record also suggested that Pence was more likely to assume the highest office in the land than most vice presidents who had come before. To put it bluntly, Trump was vulnerable to impeachment. If this occurred, Pence would see the hand of God at work in his elevation to the presidency. In the meantime, he would wait and watch. On Inauguration Day, with Pence looking on, a slightly stooped Donald Trump stepped forward when it was his turn to face the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Roberts. Beside Trump stood his wife, Melania, the former fashion model, who held two Bibles, Lincoln's and Trump's own. At the stroke of noon, the president-elect raised his right hand and placed his left on the Bibles. As he did this, Trump's family members and hundreds of political and government figures strained to see the moment. Trump and Pence were a study in contrast. At age 58, Pence appeared trim, perhaps even athletic, and could have passed for a man 10 years younger. His jacket was neatly buttoned, his hands were clasped at his waist, and his smooth face was set in a half smile. Mere feet away, in some, he resembled a small-town pastor, or maybe even a funeral director. Mere feet away, a stern-faced 70-year-old Trump stood with his coat hanging open like a caftan to reveal a long red necktie. Despite much cosmetic intervention, he looked old and tired. At the conclusion of the presidential oath, which had been voiced by 44 presidents before him, Trump said the words, "So help me God," and accepted the congratulations of those closest to him with a thin-lipped, toothless grin. He then delivered a 15-minute speech replete with distortions and falsehoods that were his trademark. He declared that America was awash with crime and despair and under constant attack. "This American carnage stops right here and stops right now," said Trump. It was the most remembered phrase of the address. That was some weird S-word, former President George W. Bush was heard to remark as he left the inaugural stand. Weird was the mildest word that one could attach to the 45th President of the United States as he launched an administration that would be stained by scandal and corruption so broad it defied a citizen's ability to grasp. Cronyism, secrecy, and nepotism would flourish. Presidential lies, daily cataloged by the Washington Post and others, would come at the rate of more than 150 per month. From the moment of his oath, Mike Pence, the vice president, faced the historic, some would say daunting, challenge of dealing with an erratic and undisciplined commander-in-chief. The book, The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence. We've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at ThomHartmann.com.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Tuesday. The Republican war on voting rolls on. You know, the president has acknowledged this. Numerous Republican politicians around the country have acknowledged that, going back to 1980, Paul Weyrich famously, when he was campaigning for Ronald Reagan, said, the voting, our leverage in the elections quite candidly goes up as the voting populace goes down. And now the Supreme Court has gotten into the act. Yesterday, after we got off the air, Tony Evers, the Democratic governor of Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Supreme Court is 4-6 Republicans, and Tony Evers yesterday had said, no, we're going to, we haven't even gotten all the ballots out to people for vote by mail, for absentee balloting. And so we're going to extend until the first week of June, the period of time in which you can get the ballots back to us. And the state Supreme Court said, no, you can't. And then the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, you can't. The city with the largest black population in Wisconsin, the most Democratic area of Wisconsin, the most Democratic city in Wisconsin, maybe parts of Madison are right up there too, but is Milwaukee. And Milwaukee normally has 180 polling places. Well, they depend on volunteers to staff those polling places, and so they only have 5 open today. In rural areas around the state, they've got the state police, they've got local officials staffing the places, and no problem at all. In the white rural areas, you can easily show up and vote, and you've got social distancing and everything else. But if you want to vote in Milwaukee, if you're black, you're going to take your life in your hands. I mean, that is that's basically what they said. In fact, here's the Supreme Court decision. This was RNC versus DNC, basically. And this is from Ruth Bader Ginsburg's dissent. And in the dissent, I'm reading from the dissent to yesterday's Supreme Court decision. Quote, because gathering at the polling place now poses dire health risks, an unprecedented number of Wisconsin voters, at the encouragement of public officials, have turned to absentee voting. Accommodating the surge of absentee ballot requests has heavily burdened election officials, resulting in a severe backlog of ballots requested but not promptly mailed to voters. The court's order requires absentee voters to postmark their ballots by Election Day, April 7th, that's today, i.e. tomorrow, this is from the decision, even if they did not receive their ballots by that day. That is a novel requirement. Yeah, you think? You have to send in your absentee ballot even if you haven't gotten it yet, otherwise it won't be counted. Ruth Bader Ginsburg continues, the court's order, I fear, will result in massive disenfranchisement. Well, of course it will. That's why they're doing it. A voter cannot deliver for postmarking a ballot she has not received, yet tens of thousands of voters who timely requested ballots are unlikely to receive them by April 7th, the court's postmark deadline. She continues, the court's suggestion that the current situation is not, quote, substantially different from an ordinary election, end quote, boggles the mind. Some 150,000 requests for absentee ballots have been processed since Thursday, state records indicate. As of Sunday morning, 12,000 ballots reportedly have not yet been mailed out. It takes days for a mailed ballot to reach its recipient. The Postal Service recommends budgeting a week, even without accounting for pandemic-induced mail delays. So here you've got the Republican Party saying, no, we don't want people to vote. We've got a really important Supreme Court case here on the election. We want to get our right-winger reelected to the Supreme Court. It's really important. And, we know that in the rural areas of the state, there's going to be no problem. The virus hasn't really hit the rural areas of the state. People are more than willing to show up. They're almost all white. Large percentages of them watch Fox so-called news and listen to right-wing hate radio. So, hey, what's your problem, people? Meanwhile, the New York Times is reporting that 3 different investment vehicles inside the Trump family have invested heavily in the French company, Sanofi, that makes hydrochloroquine, the anti-malaria drug that Trump has been pushing as a way to treat COVID-19. We're also now seeing for the first time in our country, for the first time in the history of our country, what it's actually like when you take a wannabe mob boss, lifelong grifter, and make him president of the United States. This is something, it's like a plot out of a bad Hollywood movie, but we're living it. It's just amazing. And an entire political party, the Republican Party, has thrown in with him. I mean, this is exactly what Alexander Hamilton warned us about in the Federalist Papers. I think it was Federalist 65, where he's going on about the reason for the Electoral College was to keep out men of low character. It's just incredible. Meanwhile, Plaquenil is the name of the drug in France. The company, and the French company, is the one that Trump has invested in. They own the patent for the brand name version. The drug comes with severe side effects ranging from nausea and hair loss to blindness and heart attacks. And as a consequence of that, the Swedish hospitals are saying, enough, we're not going to use this drug anymore. They've had people have terrible, terrible side effects as a result of using this drug. And so they're saying, no, I think we'll pass on this. This Rosie McCall over at Newsweek, writing, as of 2 weeks ago, Karolinska University Hospital stopped all use of chloroquine in the treatment of COVID-19. Several hospitals in Sweden have reportedly stopped administering chloroquine to coronavirus patients following reports the drug was causing adverse side effects. Among the side effects, you can die of a heart attack. Yeah, wonderful. Excuse me. Yeah, right. Don't cough on the air, Tom. So here we have, we've got the Supreme Court throwing in with the right-wingers. We've got the Wisconsin Supreme Court, when one of their own is on the ballot today. You've got now Peter Navarro. Peter Navarro has been on this program several times in the past. It's been quite a few years, but he's been a trade hawk for years. He's been opposed to offshoring American jobs, as were most of the members of the Democratic Party right up until 1992, when Bill Clinton kind of lurched the entire party to the corporate. I was going to say to the right, but it's really this is corporate versus the people, basically. And with NAFTA. And Peter Navarro, it turns out, back in January 29th, when Trump was still saying it's a Democratic hoax and it's going to vanish and it's going to be wonderful and don't worry, Peter Navarro wrote a memo to Trump and the White House team, specifically to the White House coronavirus team, saying you could have between 500,000 and 2 million. Actually, he had two memos that were about a week apart. The first one said 500,000 people could die. The second one said up to 2 million people could die. You guys have to do something. His memo also predicted, these are quotes from the memo, this lack of protection elevates the risk of the coronavirus evolving into a full-blown pandemic, imperiling the lives of millions of Americans. That was the one dated January 29th. The one dated February 23rd, he said that there's an increasing probability of a full-blown COVID-19 pandemic that could infect as many as 100 million Americans, with the loss of life of as many as 1.2 million souls. He urged immediate supplemental spending from Congress of $3 billion. He said this is not a time for penny pinching or horse trading on the Hill. He said, and he went on about this. I mean, any member of the task force who wants to be cautious about appropriating funds for a crisis that could inflict trillions of dollars in economic damage and take millions of lives has come to the wrong administration. Now, apparently they're the right one. He said we need at least 1 billion face masks over a 4 to 6 year period. He was completely ignored, contradicted, and sidelined. It's breathtaking. We'll be back. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So I'm finding little moments of optimism and humor out there, and some I think some good things are happening, but also I'm watching this freak show every afternoon. And welcome back. Vicki in Gilliamton, Wisconsin. Hey, Vicki, what's up?
Hi. Well, I'm up and I'm noticing the irony of the Supreme Court, in effect, mailing in their decision when we are supposed to show up and take our lives in our hands to make ours.
Yeah, the only person in the building was John Roberts. Everybody else did it remotely.
Yeah, that's not fair.
It's pretty breathtaking, really, when you think about it,
Yep.
But, yeah, that's what's going on.
Thanks, Tom.
So, yeah, thank you, Vicki. Good to hear from you. Jay in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Jay, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I know I'm not crazy, but within the last 2 to 3.5 years, I saw it come off of Trump's face that he'd like to cancel the elections. And I was in Los Angeles during the riots. I remember what it's like to have National Guard in the corner. It can get real creepy. Let's push back and expose him on this one. Fact check me on this, please. Okay? That's all I had for you.
Well, I think the main thing that they're going to try and do is prevent states from doing vote by mail. I mean, that's going to be their big push. Oh, this will be all over by November. Don't worry. It's going to be wonderful. Everything's going to be fine. Because they know that when vote by mail numbers go up, just like when you extend early voting, you get more women voting and you get more young people voting. And both those demographics tend to vote more Democratic than Republican, and the Republicans don't want that to happen. So the big battle, I mean, obviously we've got this battle going on in Wisconsin right now. Well, the battle is lost, I guess.
How can we have a delegate convention?
Well, I don't think we're going to have a convention. I have a feeling it's going to be a virtual convention. I had airplane tickets booked for the DNC, and I canceled them. I mean, it's just obvious to me that ain't going to happen. And we got hotel rooms and everything else.
Maybe it's time for popular vote. Like Hillary.
Oh, yeah. Well, the only way.
Popular vote.
Yeah. George Bush lost the popular vote. Donald Trump lost the popular vote. If we went by the popular vote only, the last Republican president would have been George Herbert Walker Bush, and frankly, that's the way it should be. I agree with you, but there's this thing in the Constitution about the Electoral College, and so it's going to take it's going to take enough states joining that interstate compact. You can find it over fairvote.org, as I recall. And, it's going to take a bunch of states joining that compact to participate in this thing. And, I don't see that happening right now.
Everybody's been so down on Bernie. But isn't what we're doing is socialism right now? Handing all this money around? That's socialism. And everybody's down on Bernie about it. But,
in a way,
worked real good for it, sir. Okay?
Yeah.
And I'm going to go. Okay, thank you, Tom.
I'm with you. Thanks a lot, Jay. Good talking to you. And this is this real issue, right? I mean, we've got an election coming up in November. The Republicans are going to try and say, "Oh, by then the virus will be cured." No, I don't think so. I think that this is going to play out like polio. Frankly, people lived in fear every year of polio. And, a lot of people got it. My wife's grandmother had it. Franklin Roosevelt had it. It killed a lot of people. And then finally in 1956, when the polio vaccine was developed and widely distributed, maybe it was 57. I think it was 57. I was in second grade. I still remember lining up to take the polio vaccine, the little sugar cube thing. I think we're going to see the same thing played out this time. We'll be right back. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So Thanksgiving season, and it caused me to think of all the things that I'm thankful for. Got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these 3 guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange. And Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson. And the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com. It's the Thanksgiving season, and it caused me to think with you. And now it turns out Politico is reporting that career health officials behind the scenes have been, quote, warned not to publicly speak out and potentially contradict Trump. Are we in full dictator mode yet? Is that what we're seeing here? How is this Republican plan to suppress the vote going to play out? I mean, we'll know at the end of the day today, I suppose, when Wisconsin starts reporting, how the second largest city in the state, I believe, Milwaukee, with a very, very substantial black population, going from 180 polling places down to 5. While rural areas are open and you can vote, no problem. It's going to be real interesting to see how this plays out. I'm guessing that this is the Republicans' test run for November. They wanted to have this election because they want to see if they can actually succeed. If you can force people in this situation, now keep in mind, people over 60, more likely to die from coronavirus, also probably, therefore, less likely to go vote, unless they happen to be watching Fox News. The Fox News voters will show up in large numbers to vote because they don't think it's that big a deal. And then, 3 weeks from now, you're going to start seeing them being admitted to the hospitals. And 3 to 4 weeks from now, you're going to see an explosion of deaths in Wisconsin, I predict. We'll see. I mean, I could be completely wrong, but, here we have people getting together. We know that just breathing the air that other people breathe and 6 feet, it turns out, is not a close enough distance, is enough to infect you. Some polling places have no ventilation. This is just a prescription for disaster. But the Republicans don't care if people die. They just want to hold power. It's all about power for the GOP. I mean, that is literally the only thing that they're focusing on right now. And Trump is kind of echoing this thing. I got this email this morning. Dear Fred, this is addressed to Fred Flintstone, so it's from the Trump campaign. Despite the unprecedented hardships our nation is facing right now, hardships is plural. Shouldn't that be are facing? Anyway, despite the unprecedented hardships our nation is facing right now, patriots from all across the country have stepped up to show that our movement is strong and that America will prevail. We're still 7 months away from Election Day, and we're still shattering expectations. In fact, we're stronger than ever, and President Trump's approval ratings have hit an all-time high. Democrats and their allies in the fake news media only care about one thing: power. They don't think they can beat the president at the ballot box, so they're calling on their mega Hollywood donors to bolster their failing campaigns. We may not have the coastal elites on our side, but we have something better. We have Fred on our team, and you've proven that strength in numbers is all that matters. The President appreciates your unwavering support during these challenging times. Together we are strong, and together we will prevail. P.S. Don't forget to claim your free gift from President Trump today when you make your contribution, of course. And the career public health officials said, don't contradict Trump. This is amazing. 2 days ago, I noticed, it was after the after Andrew Cuomo's Sunday press thing. He's doing these every morning, President Cuomo. And, I've never been a fan of Andrew Cuomo. He's to the right of Bill Clinton. He's, and he's a bit of an autocrat. I am not, I think he's done a marvelous job of speaking to the people and providing good information and calming people in the state of New York and around the country, frankly. And for that, he deserves congratulation. But I was seeing all these articles on Sunday. There was one in the Financial Times, there was one in the New York Times about draft Cuomo. So I just tossed out an email saying, what do you think? I was not advocating for Cuomo, right? I wouldn't do that. I'm not a fan of him. He hasn't been in the Democratic primary. But, there were all these articles in the media. So I tweeted out, I said, do you think the Democratic Party should draft Governor Cuomo as our 2020 candidate? If so, why and how? Or why not? Right? And I get these responses like, just when I was trying to trust you again, Tom, damn, screw these kinds of leading questions. Right, from P.W. Cousins. I'm not saying that the Democratic Party, at least probably 10% of these responses assumed that somehow I was promoting a Cuomo presidency. But what it was, I actually just wanted to get the temperature. I wanted to find out if these news stories actually reflected a groundswell on the part of the Democratic base, or if this was just commentators, blowing smoke. And I think it's the latter, solidly. I think out of the several hundred responses that I got to that tweet, there were like 2 or 3 that said, yeah, he's doing a great job. Let's try and get him into the Democratic Party, for president. He could take on Trump. Everybody else was like, you realize Cuomo was trying to cut Medicaid in New York? You realize Cuomo is the worst kind of corporate Democrat in New York? Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I know that. But it's fascinating, number one, to see this play out in the media. And, again, I salute Cuomo for what he's doing every morning. But even more fascinating is how different Twitter responses are. It's like on Twitter, people just go for the angry instantly. It's bizarre. Anyhow, we'll be back. What do you think about Andrew Cuomo?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I frankly see no way that he could be drafted anyway. If anybody is, Joe Biden's not going to get the nomination. And certainly it should be Bernie Sanders. He's got about half the votes. Vilma Espin was the president of the Federation of Cuban Women since its founding in 1960. and was the chair of the Commission for Social Prevention and president of the Infancy Institute and the International Federation of Democratic Women. And it's a long-form interview, actually, the book. So the first question, what does socialism mean in the lives of a Cuban family, and in particular, Cuban woman? Velma Espin. For the Cuban family, especially the woman, socialism has meant an enormous improvement to the quality of life and personal development. We should remember that until January 1st, 1959, in our country, hunger, poverty, exploitation, repression, and dependence reigned. The revolution opened up new horizons in the economic, political, and social fields, and amongst its key principles is the defense of equal rights for all human beings. The constant struggle to make ends meet disappeared, and with it the antagonism between people competing for the crumbs that could help them escape the tragic destiny that awaited the majority. Thus the family, the basic cell of society, could develop in a rounded way. Our revolution assured all Cubans the chance to exercise each one of their inalienable rights. Each citizen is assured that food prices are reasonable and that education and medical services are free. The state makes a systemic effort to improve living standards to the extent that it is permitted by the tense battle for development that we wage under blockade and constant imperialist threats. Child care facilities have been created to provide care for the children of tens of thousands of working women from the age of 3 months to 6 years. Services to lighten domestic work have been created. Hundreds of thousands of students have also received free lunch at day school and all their meals at boarding school. Hundreds of thousands of workers also receive their meals at a moderate price in their workplace. More industrial laundries and dry cleaners have been established, and more domestic labor-saving devices are available with preference in acquisition and cheaper prices for workers. Huge resources are dedicated to housing construction in urban and rural zones. We also try to guarantee recreational facilities and spiritual enjoyment to all the population. Of course, the possibilities are exciting, but also what we have achieved to date, considering our limitations, is already vastly superior to what families experienced in the past. Social Security provides an income for those who cannot work. As far as women are concerned, equal rights have certainly changed their position in the family and in society. A woman's participation in social production, because it implies her financial independence, has altered her dependent position in the marriage and allowed a change in her ideas, in the way she looks at life. The laws that govern family relations, such as the Family Code, are based on equality and guarantee the right of members of the family to participate in society, to work, study, and to responsibly educate the children in line with our revolutionary principles. This does not mean that we achieved all that we aspire to. We still have problems of a material nature to resolve, which are directly related to our economic development. There is still the need to eliminate backward ideas that some people hold, men and women, with respect to the role that each person should play within the home, the nature of the socialist family and the relationship between a couple, ideas which work against the full participation of women in the building of a new society. Obviously, the economic security guaranteed by both men and women having access to work, free health care, and education, the obvious satisfaction and confidence in oneself that equal opportunity and the chance to fully develop to the extent of one's talents, intelligence, and aptitude offer to each person, the constant motivation and emotional stability that comes from feeling useful, recognized, and dignified as a human being. Everything that socialism has brought to us undoubtedly fulfills the deepest desires of a family, particularly the woman, who until just a quarter century ago was exploited, oppressed, and marginalized in the family and in society. Question: what is the primary concern in Cuba, work or the human being? What place do women occupy within this concern? Velma Espin. In Cuba, a country that is building socialism, the highest aim is human happiness, based on respect for the fundamental human rights of each person. That includes full social equality to education, healthcare, work, and professional training, with the chance to employ all of one's faculties to take an active role in society and to help develop that society, to create the material and spiritual basis for a full, harmonious life, where the highest qualities of both men and women flourish. To reach those aspirations requires work, talent, dedication, and willingness from everybody. It requires constant scientific and technological innovation to assure economic and social development. Thus, each member of our society, along with the right to work and all the benefits brought by the revolution, has acquired the duty to help create the economic basis necessary for such advantages. The building of a new society and the fulfillment of new aspirations could not possibly be achieved except on the basis of work and the willingness of the whole population. And the people work with enthusiasm because work is the means for creating wealth and goods for all to enjoy. Work that is free from exploitation does require a new dimension, a quality that stimulates and produces satisfaction. To feel that you are useful and are creating your destiny, to project yourselves toward the future through your work, to cultivate the future. In a speech in January 1964, Che Guevara said that when each Cuban viewed work as a vital expression of their human creativity, technology, technique, and inventions would proceed apace, and all would participate with an uncontainable force in building the new society. The book, Cuban Women Confront the Future by Vilma Espin.
Coming up in the science revolution is Mad King Trump deciding which states will live and which states will die. Associate Professor of Economics Pavlina Cherneva is here to talk about what would FDR do about COVID-19. The last Democratic governor of Alabama, Don Siegelman, drops by to talk about how prisons are handling the coronavirus and what they should do. In Geeky Science, attorney and regulatory policy advocate with Public Citizen Amit Narang is here, asking why Trump is fighting clean car standards instead of the coronavirus. Check it all out wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thanks to Through Her Eyes Cat at Twitter. Milwaukee is, who's apparently in Wisconsin, Milwaukee is our largest city. Madison is next and Green Bay after that. Thank you. I had just assumed, I guess, that, and you know what happens when you assume. And Denzel Weaver says, I know I'm not tripping. Thom Hartmann used to be live on Twitter, too. Yeah, our show should be live on Twitter right now. Not sure, what's going on with all that, but hopefully it is. But anyhow, let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Jim in Milwaukee. Hey, Jim, what's up? You found one of those 5 open polling places?
Yeah, I do. I had to go to a different place to vote because, they had closed most of them. And I was expecting a line, maybe down the block, around the corner and everything. But we went to this high school, which is fairly new, and they had a really huge gymnasium. And this place was so well organized, and there was volunteers everywhere. We walked in, they squirted our hands with some sanitizer. Before you can go to get the ballot, they make sure that you're a registered voter. And if you go to another table, they direct you where it is because there was a line at least a half a block long, And I was in and out in a half hour, both me and my wife. I was pleased. I was going to go because I thought it was going to be a disaster. But I know that if I didn't, they win. And I had to go. Rain or shine, I'm going. And it was a pleasant deal.
That's a tough one, Jim, because just, somebody just getting close enough to you to put hand sanitizer on your hands, you're in the field of their breath. I mean, that's
everyone had masks. All the volunteers had masks. We had a mask. Well, some people had gloves. They all had gloves.
Yeah.
Well, and it was good. I'm telling you, it worked out good.
Yeah. But you should have been able to vote by mail, Jim.
I should have. I missed it.
Yeah. No, I don't mean to blame you. I'm saying, the governor said we're going to extend the vote by mail deadline to June 6th. And the state Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court struck that down. And both of them entirely on partisan lines.
Yep.
This is the new Republican strategy. Yeah, I'm with you. Jim, thank you for the call. I sure hope so. Tom in Waupaca, Wisconsin. Am I saying that right, Tom?
Waupaca, Tom. I appreciate the call.
Thank you. What's up?
Interesting to listen to Jim in Milwaukee. I'm an hour and a half north of him in rural Wisconsin, and it's a different world. But I've lived here since '71. I'm a political scientist. This state is the history textbook on what's going on with corporate America, corporate media, rigged electorate, Citizens United. Walker was the Koch brother creation. I haven't seen my state representative, who's a Republican, live at a public open event since he ran for first election 12 years ago. So I don't know what Jim's thinking in Milwaukee. I'm glad he's voting. I voted absentee. I don't know a single person up here who's a Democrat who's going to the polls today. They all voted absentee. All my friends voted absentee. Every damn one of them.
That's great. That's great. And hopefully that'll show up tonight.
Tony Evers is a god in a state that's quite frankly still Mississippi. And our Republicans have sold their souls. They're not a party. They're a cult. But until we clean up corporate America, corporate media, and get the chambers of commerce to stop supporting these bastards, we're in trouble. And the Chamber of Commerce here is the one pushing the Supreme Court over the edge here and have been with Citizens United money for 15 years now or whatever. So we got a lot of issues here. We're the Petri dish. We need the nation to come save us because this state isn't strong enough. Tony's not strong enough alone to do it.
To stand up to billionaires like Charles Koch and his buddies.
Charles Koch, he's not alone. The beer barons in Milwaukee are with them. I mean, Menards is with them. Quick Trip Corporation. I could go down a list.
And you got United Health is headquartered there. I'm sure that they're not
got that. I mean,
politically inactive.
And we've got no functioning independent media of strength. And the weekly.
Oh, wait a minute. United Healthcare is in Minnesota. I'm sorry, but I'm with you.
Yeah, the weekly newspapers are not strong enough. The Gannett newspapers have dwindled. I mean, it's just a complete train wreck of confluences of bad rivers in this state. And La Follette no longer resides here, Tom. This is completely a red state, other than Madison and Milwaukee.
Yeah. Well, time will tell, Tom. There's a lot of change in the air, and on the other hand, you see countries around the world. Look at Orban's Hungary. That they're using the coronavirus as an excuse to crack down on dissent.
Right.
So we'll see how this
plays out. We've seen this playbook before, Tom, in history. I'm optimistic. I have to be. I have a millennial, but I think it's going to take a long time to wean this out. Keep fighting,
I'm
Wisconsin.
Optimistic too,
Keep
Tom.
fighting America.
You got it. You got it, Tom. Thank you for the call. Dave in Goodman, Wisconsin. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind?
Hi,
what's your
Tom.
experience
It's actually
here?
Armstrong Creek, which is about 5 miles from Goodman. But I voted this morning, and I've been voting in the same place. It's a small polling place, a community center. And the same ladies that were there, we all had masks. Got in and out really fast. But they were pretty disgusted that they had to be there. And I kind of, voiced my views. And we all know what it's all about. Even though I would say they probably in the past have been Republican, I think they're kind of changing their attitude right now, the way it seemed to me. And, this virus, there's cases in northern Wisconsin in the UP. It's crossed the bridge into the UP. I'm very close to the border. And there's a death in one of the hospitals that I would normally go to. And so this virus is around. And a lot of the people that were coming in behind me weren't wearing masks. They were elderly. And I don't think they're taking this seriously. And once we start getting a few cases around here, this could get passed on really easily, even though it's a very rural area. But
those elderly people not wearing masks are probably your Fox News
up
viewers.
Here. There's a few more people like me around here too. So, but it is kind of Trump country, and I don't know what they see in this man, but I think they watch Fox News too much. So, anyway, you have a good day, Tom.
Is amazing. Thank you, Dave. Good to hear from you. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring everybody's attention to a report that was done by Amy Goodman, and she interviewed Dr. Wang, who used to work in Taiwan, and he's an epidemiologist. But what I wanted to say was they were very proactive and started early in December, and they did, I would say, everything right. And the result is they have only, last I looked, 5 deaths. and that's out of 25 million. They did test a lot of people. They quarantined people from Wuhan right away for 14 days. They merged both the healthcare service, so that those people were included, and then immigration. And it's just absolutely tremendous, the work that they did. And I have to say also, as a democracy, 75% of the people voted in Taiwan. They have a consensus. The report was just moving. I mean, they showed, children and how they complied with it. They wiped their feet off. They wore masks. They washed their hands. There was just everything that you could think of that, you would do as on the advice of epidemiologists, pathologists, people that know about disease, physicians, and that's who they followed at the highest levels of government. They didn't have, Mike Pence running it or Mr. Trump's son-in-law, Mr. Kushner. Yeah. I mean, it is just pathetic. They are pathetic people. We need to get rid of them. They are literally destroying the very fabric of this country. And let's not mince words about it anymore. I wish one day I'd like to see the press corps get up all at the same time and say, we've had enough of this. Who do you think you are?
Well, here's the problem, John. About a third of the press corps in that room are right-wing media that Trump has hand-selected. He's been, he's got a few token reporters from the so-called corporate media. He keeps the guy from CNN in there and Yamiche Alcindor from PBS. Just basically so he has a periodic foil so that he can go off on somebody and Fox News can turn it into a thing. But sadly, I mean, the press corps. To the extent that they're in that room. I would like to see a good story about exactly who is in the room and where they came from. But we're seeing One America News Network, this obscure right-wing web-based so-called television network and stuff like that. I mean, it's bizarre. John, thank you for the call. I'm with you. They are destroying our country. We'll continue our conversation right after this. By the way, the Trump family seems to be profiting off this drug.
To Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The three different Trump family investment vehicles are heavily invested in Sanofi, the French company that makes chloroquine. Surprise, surprise. And welcome back. Let's see here. Kurt in Chicago. Hey, Kurt, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching Free Speech.
Oh, hello. Yes.
Hey,
I am a truck driver in the middle of the supply chain, and I think that I'm seeing a problem that needs to be addressed first and foremost in the supply chain.
Okay.
The only thing that's holding everything together right now is that supply chain, from the first part of that chain to the last part and everything in between. And I'm not seeing that addressed enough. So,
how so? Give me some specifics here, Kurt. These are all generalizations. I don't know what to make of them.
Yes.
Give me some examples.
Correct. The need to move supplies from production to store shelves for people to buy and go into stores and buy, that need is only available if you have workers maintaining that need who are well paid because they are high-risk workers. Everyone in the supply chain is a high-risk worker. They should be compensated for that. They should be given health care coverage for that risk, not out of pocket at all. That's a big, big deal that needs to be addressed right now. And everyone in that supply chain needs to be guaranteed a working wage and health care coverage where they can do that risk of work in the front lines of the supply chain. And that is what will hold.
Yeah, I agree. Are you seeing any specific examples of that supply chain breaking down, or is this your feeling or your sense or your speculation?
A mix of all of those, yes. That is true. Mm-hmm. But I work for a large carrier. I'm a truck driver, and I deliver goods. And I see right now in Chicago, some of our trucks are parked in a lot where some of them have stickers of quarantine because drivers are getting sick. This is still early, okay? This will go on. We will see more trucks with stickers of quarantine where drivers get sick. This will continue throughout the supply chain in every aspect of it.
Well, the other side of that, though, Kurt, apparently it takes about 21 days from the time someone shows symptoms until they're free of the virus, essentially, assuming that they're part of the 98% who survive it, and or the 80% who don't get hospitalized. Once people are on the back side of this, you're going to have a workforce that has been through the virus and is now presumably immune to it.
Yes. Exactly.
Are you seeing evidence of that starting to show up? People showing up saying, yeah?
That would be the rational viewpoint. Unfortunately, people in the workforce are not that rational, and they might panic before that happens. But regardless, correct. Absolutely. What you just said is 100% right.
Yeah. So I think over the next month or so, we're going to see some small returns to normalcy. It's going to be spotty, but it's going to, and yeah. Kurt, I got to run, but thank you for the call. And thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. Stick around. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. Got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at ThomHartmann.com. Thanks again for supporting the program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We're sort of doing anything goes pandemic and have been, for the last week or so. We will continue to into the future. So, pretty much whatever's on your mind. I am just boggled by, what's going on with the Supreme Court. Speaking of the Supreme Court, I'll get into this in the next hour, but we're also, by the way, in our second and third hour of the program today, we're going to drop in, check in with Victoria Jones about what's going on with Boris Johnson in the UK and all that kind of thing. And we also have a fascinating piece on the rights of nature. It'll be in our third hour. Thomas Lindsay from CELDEF, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, is going to be with us on the rights of nature and how they're winning out. Some good stuff. Debbie in Prescott, Wisconsin. Hey, Debbie, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, Tom. First-time caller, long-time listener. I'm an old RN, very close to your age probably, still working with Mayo Clinic. Was going to retire June 1, had all the paperwork in, but rescinded it with this pandemic. I work out of my home, so it's easy for me to keep on working. But I'm a gardener. I live out in the country. I live in a local farming community surrounded by many GOP people. Mm-hmm. And it's so darn frustrating. My neighbors that we share a driveway just put up a big old flagpole yesterday with the American flag and a Trump 2020 underneath it. I was just livid when I went out to my driveway. The good news is I can't see it from my house, which is good. But I'm going to, I had a garden cart made last summer. I believe in peace, love, and harmony. I'm going to fight back. I had a sign. I'm having a sign prepared that says Peace Garden. I'm going to put it out on the roadside or near the road. When my flowers start blooming and start making bouquets and putting some treats out there, I am going to fight back with love. I sense the frustration with Wisconsin voters. I am a poll worker, too. Little Township Hall, I refuse to work. You know, I'm an RN. I've got a daughter with breast cancer who's a physician and a son with asthma. They're in their 40s. I understand the seriousness of what's going on out there, and I just want everyone else to, too. But keep a positive attitude. Wisconsin, we got to get through this. And I'm a Bernie supporter. Have been, will always be. But I will vote for who is ever going to beat Trump.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Amen. Debbie, thank you for that. Thank you for that. I got the email last week from the Trump campaign saying, would you like a Trump 2020 yard sign? And, you know, I probably should have said, yes, I could come up with inventive things to do with it. But, you know, dump on top or something like that.
I saw Bernie in St. Paul this summer, and I've got his sign, and I'm gonna have to take it out there. I haven't done it quite yet, but I need to take it out there and put it on a stake on the end of my driveway. Yeah. Just because, I mean, we're not the only ones. I mean, I've got a ton of family members that, you know, my personal family are, of course, you know, Democrat, and my significant up near the Brule River is also, his family is all Democrat, but my personal siblings from Iowa farm country, all Republican. I cannot have a conversation with any of my siblings about this.
Debbie, thank you for checking in with. I've got to move along, but thank you, and thanks for sharing your story. Renee in Paris, France. Hey, Renee, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you. I listen to your show every day, and thank you for what you do. My hometown is Plymouth, Wisconsin, so of course I'm very concerned on what's going on back in Wisconsin. One thing that really hasn't been talked about is tying together the issue of voting by mail and the upcoming problems with the Postal Service. It seems to me that they were overlooked in the bailout, and if the move is going to be towards ballot by mail, which I fully support, that's a problem if some government, you know, person or persons way up there high in the government decide to kind of start messing with the Postal Service. Then what do we do?
Well, they started messing with it in 2005 when they said that they had to set aside $5 billion every year to pay for the retirement of people 75 years from now, people who haven't even been born yet. And, you know, that was done to stop the post office from making its fleet of vehicles electric cars. That's still going on. And now they're projecting that the post office is going to run out of cash in June. So you're absolutely right. Right. Something needs to be done. So the simple thing would be to simply unlock the tens of billions of dollars that the post office has stashed in this retirement fund for 75 years from now, for the health benefits of people 75 years from now. But it has to be, you're absolutely right, Renee. I mean, this has to be done right away. In addition to passing federal legislation that essentially preempts the states, these 17 states where you've got to have a doctor's slip to get an absentee ballot, and making, you know, universal vote by mail for November. I mean, it's just got to be done.
Right. We need the infrastructure to have the vote by mail. We have to have it.
There you go. I'm with you. Renee, thanks so much for watching us there in Paris, France on Facebook Live. I appreciate it. It's great to hear from you, and thanks for weighing in as another former Wisconsin resident. What a fascinating day. We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day in just a moment. We're going to check in with Victoria Jones, too. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone and of his own accord would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program. And the essence of it is, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy. An African American, and the other story out of New York State where the police officers hogtied this guy, arms, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. On the White Vote. The book, The Embattled Vote in America, by Alan J. Lichtman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is our old friend Victoria Jones, the chief Washington analyst with the DC Radio Company. Her Twitter handle is Victoria Jones DC. Victoria, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. I wanted to get an update on what's going on, or what you're hearing is going on with Boris Johnson. I realize, you're an American citizen, a U.S. reporter based in Washington, D.C., but you're also, you were born in Great Britain and you have great connections there, and you watch that media very carefully. I'm curious your thoughts on the Queen's speech Sunday night, and I particularly want you to help us understand this whole concept of shadow ministers. So let's start with Boris Johnson. What's the latest?
Boris Johnson is in ICU, intensive care in the hospital. Downing Street, number 10, is saying that Boris Johnson does not have pneumonia. Now, until today, ministers and number 10 have refused to give a clear answer to that question. He does have coronavirus. But until today, they would not answer whether he had pneumonia. He was stable overnight and remains in good spirits. He has received oxygen, but he apparently has not been on a ventilator. His Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, has temporarily been put in charge, whatever that means, and it's very unclear. There is a very interesting backstory, both in The Guardian and in The Telegraph, about how Boris Johnson has been sicker with coronavirus than either he or his aides were letting on for some days now. Thursday morning, the suggestion made by a source was that a bed was being prepared at St. Thomas's Hospital for the Prime Minister. And a Conservative member of Parliament had heard a similar story. And this was basically denied. And this went on for some time. Yeah, the denials went on. And obviously, this was true. And he continued for days, as you know, to say he was sharing things and doing all these things. It's now coming out, well, he wasn't exactly doing all this work. He was being updated on things.
But he was basically sick as a dog, apparently.
Well, sick as a dog.
So I'm curious how the British people are responding to this, Victoria. If Trump was to come down with the coronavirus right now, I think probably there would be a fairly predictable partisan split, with Democrats saying, he shouldn't have minimized it. If he had jumped on it on January 20th, the same day that we had our first case as South Korea, if he had done what South Korea did. South Korea has no deaths today. China has no deaths today. South Korea has fewer than 300 dead people total. We're averaging that every 5 or 6 hours. It's all his own fault. On the other hand, you would have had Republicans saying, "How dare you politicize this mess? We've got to all pray for our president." How's it breaking out in the UK with regard to Boris Johnson? Because he was an early COVID-19 or coronavirus denier, just like Trump. In fact, they were the only two, I think, in the Western world.
Yeah, they're looking at it a bit differently. I'd also urge your listeners to be a little suspicious of the numbers coming out of China, to be suspicious of the number 0.
But South Korea's numbers are solid, and they're verifiable.
South Korea's numbers, I would think they're solid, but I wouldn't trust any numbers coming out of China at this point. Well, the British are taking it a little differently. Boris Johnson, according to people who have worked with him in the past and people who know him now, does not believe in illness and sees it as a weakness. So this itself is very interesting. But people are generally wishing him well from both sides of the aisle. There isn't a conspiracy belief that he's somehow been infected or something like that. One mayor of a town or a council leader did put something on Facebook about how he deserved it. She's now thoroughly apologized. But generally, that has not been publicly verbalized. A question was asked at the press conference by Dominic Raab today about, if you're so big about telling people to be careful and not catch it, how come 3 senior ministers of your government have come down with it? And the answer was, well, it's indiscriminate.
Yeah. Tell us about the Queen's speech, and also Ed Miliband is I guess the shadow business, energy and industry secretary. Well, first the Queen's speech, how that was well received, and it was the kind of state. Well, I'll let you talk about it, but and then I want to get into this whole shadow labor thing. We have about 4 minutes, Victoria. And let me mention also, as we transition into that at the time this is all happening, we should bear in mind that Parliament has been sitting for a month. And there are rumblings about this, that all these decisions are being made by senior ministers, and Parliament is not involved in any oversight. So this is considered quite serious. The Queen's speech was, it was not a war queen. It was a queen who was really calling on Britain to come together. And it was only the 5th speech by the Queen to the nation like this. And it was very powerful, calling for quiet, good-humored resolve, fellow feeling, self-discipline, and reminding people that people will remember how we responded on this. And it was, she doesn't speak with a lot of emotion. It's not her way. But it was extremely powerful. And her several references to the Second World War, Churchill herself as a young woman, and to that very strong wartime song. These are things that resonate with Britons, whether they're strong monarchists or not. And I think it hit the right notes. Yeah, it seemed that way from this side. In the 2.5 or 1.5 minutes we have left, tell us about shadow ministers and how that might be adopted in the United States.
This is interesting. They have a shadow cabinet in whatever party is out of power. Keir Starmer, the new Labour leader, has brought in people from the outside, as well as the people who ran against him in this Labour leadership contest. Ed Miliband, who's a former Labour leader, has been given a shadow leadership post. And this is very interesting. Keir Starmer, in his acceptance speech, also apologized to the Jewish community, something Jeremy Corbyn never really did. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how strong Keir Starmer comes out in his leadership when Parliament comes back.
So they use these shadow positions basically to say, if I was in power, here's what I'd be doing. And it gets widely publicized because they're the shadow ministers. Do you think that might ever happen here?
Yes. It would be a good idea to basically shadow the minister. They're like defense on a football field. They shadow them. And they hold them to account effectively and saying, well, that's what he's doing, but he should be doing this.
Yeah. So Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders would be well advised to create shadow cabinets?
I think it would be a really effective thing because, yes, they could hold they could hold President Trump's cabinet more to account that way.
You're absolutely right. With the Thank you, Victoria. It's great talking with you today. Her Twitter handle is Victoria Jones
Thom
DC.
Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's 15 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Well, I've just been wondering, there's a meme going around that I'm hearing people saying, these MAGA people saying that out of the Constitution tell me that because Trump was acquitted, his first term is nullified, he can legally run for...
Yeah, no. Trump's first term was not nullified, and he can't legally run for a third. Say what?
That's what I keep saying. And then another quick bit of satire. I expect everybody that's so anti-democratic socialism, when they get their checks, to send it back. Otherwise, you're endorsing socialism.
Yeah, right. There you go. Yeah, I got it. Mark, thank you. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's up?
Well, I was just wondering if it would be possible for the Joint Chiefs of Staff to have a meeting with Trump and tell him, you're the commander-in-chief, but now you are relieved of your command. I guess that would be a coup d'etat. I think we need one. I don't think this country can take one more day of this guy being president.
Well, we're going to have to. I don't think the Joint Chiefs could do that, but the group that can do that under the Constitution is the Cabinet. They can invoke the 25th Amendment. It would require Mike Pence to step forward. But yeah, I agree with you, Dennis. They're all getting exactly what they want. Wilbur Ross, the billionaire investor, is getting inside stock tips. He's apparently also a big investor in the chloroquine company. Betsy DeVos is getting to privatize schools all over the country. She's happy. Wheeler, the head of the EPA, is a former coal lobbyist, is shutting down regulations. The guy who's running Interior, forgive me for not remembering his name, a former oil lobbyist, is selling off public lands. You got Steve Mnuchin at Treasury, who's passing out hundreds of billions of dollars to his good buddies in the big banks. He used to be with Goldman Sachs, and he's a former bankster and the guy who threw thousands and thousands of Californians out of their homes when he ran a bank in California, the so-called foreclosure king. So I don't see any of these. And of course, Mike Pence is young enough that he can run for president in 4 years and, obviously fully expects to. And as long as he keeps giving Trump these adoring looks, George Will called it oleaginous today. Spot on. But I'm with you. I don't think that these. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say also, I am waiting for a reporter to, one of these reporters, maybe it has to be Acosta, to just really tell Trump off in front of millions of TV viewers. You know, just call him a big liar right to his face. You're lying. We have you on tape poo-pooing this a month or two ago. Stop denying it, and you are responsible, sir. Somebody needs to step up to the plate like Rather did back in the Watergate era when he asked Nixon if he, what are you, when he was asked, are you running for something by Nixon? And he said, I'm not. Are you? We need a moment like that to put this man in his place. So that's all I got to say.
I'm not holding my breath, but I completely agree with you, Dennis. I'm not holding my breath, but spot on. I would like to see some courage coming out of the press corps, but frankly, it's too late for me. I stopped on Friday. I think maybe even Thursday was the last time that I was willing to tolerate that man's voice in my house any longer. Whenever Trump comes on, I go to BBC. It's just very simple. We'll be right back.
Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So in our latest video for supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com, you'll find a riff about a fellow named Errol Graham. He's a 57-year-old African English individual who starved to death recently in the United Kingdom. The neoliberal Thatcher policies are apparently echoing through the British system now in a rather substantial way, the same way that Reaganomics is echoing through the American system, and we've got tens of thousands of Americans who die every year because they lack health care or they can't afford copays and things. And we have literally millions of children in America who are malnourished or even go to bed hungry every night. It's pretty breathtaking stuff, and I think you'll find the rant particularly interesting or useful, and hope you can share it with your friends when you pick it up. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Thanks again for supporting our program.
We're back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The Supreme Court, the big news that I opened the show with, of course, is that the Supreme Court said, the U.S. Supreme Court said, if you want to have your vote registered in the election, you have to physically show up in Wisconsin if you haven't already received your mail-in ballot, even though the state has not yet mailed out all the mail-in ballot people who requested them. In other words, Tony Evers, sorry, screw you, we're going with the Republicans. Well, that's the story out of the Supreme Court that's getting all the traction, all the publicity, all the air time. But another thing came out of the Supreme Court yesterday that I think was really noteworthy. The Supreme Court announced that on May 6th, which is basically a month from today is April 7th, on May 6th, the Supreme Court is going to hear opening arguments in the Trump administration and 20 Republican secretaries of state and governors' efforts to completely do away with the Affordable Care Act, end Obamacare altogether, period, full stop, back to barbarism. It'll throw 20 million people off their Affordable Care Act plans. It'll cause 135 million Americans who have pre-existing conditions to be in a position where their insurance companies can now screw them or screw with them. And we don't yet know how the insurance companies are going to deal with coronavirus. So they're going to say, oh, that's a pre-existing condition, or that's an act of God, we're not covering it, whatever. But here you have Donald Trump, Bill Barr, and 20 Republican attorneys general and governors, 20 Republican governors from around the country, all going to the Supreme Court, and no, they have not withdrawn the case, arguing that the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, needs to be wiped out, eliminated, do away with it. No more protecting us from the health insurance companies if we have pre-existing conditions. No more protecting us from the health insurance companies if we hit a lifetime limit. No more protecting us from the health insurance companies if they want to jack up our rates. No more protecting us from the health insurance companies and the for-profit hospital industry on surprise billings, although those protections are fairly thin, but there are some in there. None of that. No more expansion of Medicaid. Working poor people all across the United States, people who are working for $10, $7.25 an hour, $8 an hour, $9 an hour, $10 an hour, $11 an hour. Across the country, the bottom half of our workforce is on average making less than $15 an hour. And that bottom half of our workforce, in fact, the largest percentage of them are making less than $11 an hour. That workforce has had the ability to get Medicaid through the Medicaid expansion in the Affordable Care Act. Now, yes, there's a bunch of Republican states that never expanded their Medicaid, and that's one of the reasons why you're going to see some really horrific death numbers coming out of these places. We're already seeing it right now in Louisiana, where in rural Louisiana counties, I believe the number was about half of all the, it might even be higher than that, half of all the people in Louisiana who are dying of coronavirus right now are African American, but the state's population isn't 50% black. And the reason for that is it's hitting rural areas that are very poor that don't have hospitals. And, if you can't get into a hospital, you're not going to get into an ICU bed, and a ventilator. It just, it doesn't happen. And the only reason they put people on ventilators, is because without the ventilator, they would die. I mean, it's just that simple. And so what do you do if you live in a county where there's no hospital or where the hospital has one ventilator, as is the case with a lot of these rural hospitals? I mean, this is just going to be a flaming disaster. And those states that have not expanded, like Florida and Mississippi, for example, they have seen hundreds of rural hospitals close just in the last couple of years because Medicaid isn't there to pay for the care for people in these hospitals. So people just die at home. They don't go in when they find a lump or they have a pain or whatever. They don't go to the doctor. They don't go to the hospital, and they die of preventable diseases, preventable illnesses. And this is exactly the way the Republicans want it. Just let the poor die. To hell with them. That's the official Republican mantra. Anderson Cooper asked Ron Paul, you got a 30-year-old man who's got hit by a car and he's out in front, but he doesn't have insurance. He's out in front of the emergency room of the hospital. What should the hospital do? And Ron Paul basically said, let him die in the gutter. I mean, that's the Republican way, right? Let them die in the gutter. And I'm astonished that this isn't like one of the lead stories in the news today all across the country. Donald Trump wants to rip health insurance away from 20 million people and rip from 135 million Americans protections against health insurance companies saying we won't cover something that you had before, pre-existing conditions. Half of us have pre-existing conditions. The Trump administration wants to screw half of America. And they're fighting to do so in front of the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court just set a date for a month from yesterday. And the Trump administration and these Republicans are going to go in there and go, this is unconstitutional, this is a terrible thing. It's got Obama's name on it, We can't have that. America's first black president can't have any legislative victories. We've got to erase him. This is getting weird. Anyhow, I'll pick up your phone calls after the break. It is coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's your media support group for We the People. We'll be back.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Vince Houghton's Nuking the Moon and Other Intelligence Schemes and Military Plots Left on the Drawing Board. This is Chapter 7, Operation Northwoods. On April 17, 1961, more than 1,400 Cuban exiles forming the Brigada de Asalto 2506 landed on the beaches of Cuba at Playa Girón in the Bahia de Cojinos, the Bay of Pigs. Their mission was to overthrow the regime of Fidel Castro, Cuba's increasingly communist leader, who had himself overthrown the regime of American ally Batista just 2 years before. A communist leader just 90 miles from Key West was a rather painful thorn in the side of the newly inaugurated President John F. Kennedy, and his ouster was considered a high national security priority, as it had been for Kennedy's predecessor, Dwight Eisenhower. The invasion was backed by the U.S. government and the CIA. We can argue why the Bay of Pigs invasion failed until we're blue in the face, and many people still do. For many in the Cuban exile community, the mission failed because JFK refused to give American naval and air support, elements called in for the original plan developed by the Eisenhower administration. Maybe this is true. The problem here is that we begin to descend into the realm of the counterfactuals, the if-onlys and what-ifs, things that we are doing our damnedest to avoid. Look, I've met a lot of the Cubans who took part in that invasion, many of whom are permanently settled in or around Miami, my hometown. They are impressive men, and I wouldn't put anything past them. If they say they could have kicked out Castro with U.S. naval and air support, who am I to argue? But I still will, because things are much more complicated from an intelligence perspective. Despite the lack of air and naval support, and despite the intensity and desire of the Cuban exile forces, it would have been immeasurably difficult to overcome one of the most problematic aspects of the entire invasion. Castro not only knew they were coming, he knew when and where they were coming. A combination of piss-poor information security, or in today's parlance, InfoSec, with the ability of Cuban intelligence to infiltrate the Miami exile community meant that the secret mission to free Cuba of Castro was anything but secret. It's not like this was a huge surprise for the CIA or the U.S. military. The Cuban intelligence service was very good, and some in the exile community had loose lips. In this environment, it was nearly impossible to conduct effective counterintelligence and keep the invasion secret. Most telling of all, the Soviets had literally broadcast their knowledge of the mission 4 days before it happened. On April 13th, Radio Moscow released an English-language newscast in which they predicted an invasion of Cuba by CIA-trained exiles within the week. It seems they were trying to warn us against carrying out the invasion, a type of deterrence through propaganda. Hey, we know you're coming, so perhaps now is not a good time for your secret operation. Clearly, that didn't work. The blowback from the failed mission was significant on multiple levels. More than 100 members of the 2506 Brigade were killed in combat, along with 4 American volunteer pilots from the Alabama Air National Guard, who were contracted by the CIA. Hundreds more in Cuba would be executed in the days and weeks following the invasion, as Castro eliminated anyone suspected of abetting the exiles. More than 1,200 of the brigade would be captured by the Cuban government, and some of those members were subsequently executed. The Kennedy administration was embarrassed by the failed mission. The U.S. government looked inept in failing to maintain order even in its own backyard. In the zero-sum game of the Cold War, where victory for one of the superpowers was defeat for the other, this was a huge win for the Soviets. Not to mention that the invasion pushed Castro even more firmly into the Soviet sphere of influence. And as far as the strength of the regime was concerned, the Bay of Pigs invasion did the exact opposite of what was intended. It made Castro's regime more powerful than ever before. The operation was a great political victory for the Cubans at home and abroad. Castro was a hero in the eyes of his people for defeating the Yankee invasion and was able to consolidate his power. The fiasco also elevated the Cuban government to a newfound global status, transforming communist Cuba from a grieved little country to an equal in the eyes of the world. In fact, Argentinian physician turned Cuban revolutionary Ernesto Che Guevara actually thanked the United States for the failed invasion. The CIA bore the brunt of the blame for the failed mission. President Kennedy fired CIA Director Allen Dulles, along with Deputy Director Charles Cabell and Deputy Director for Plans Richard M. Bissell, the 3 men who made up the core of the agency's leadership, particularly in the realm of covert action. Kennedy also removed, at least temporarily, major paramilitary operations from the purview of the CIA. For more than a decade, CIA had been the agency with primary responsibility for paramilitary covert operations, but now it was benched. Into the void leapt the U.S. military. In June 1961, about 2 months after the Bay of Pigs, President Kennedy approved National Security Action Memoranda 55, 56, and 57, which codified the shift in paramilitary responsibility from the CIA to the Pentagon. Nothing else really changed. The U.S. government was still looking for ways to oust Castro from power, just through a different government agency. By autumn, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations, Brigadier General Edward Lansdale, a legendary intelligence officer, or infamous, or both, depending on your perspective, was asked to brainstorm ideas to get rid of Fidel. He didn't disappoint. In February 1962, Lansdale provided a document titled Possible Actions to Provoke, Harass, or Disrupt Cuba. Some of the actions are pretty good, some are quite silly, and some are downright abhorrent. The book is Nuking the Moon by Vince Houghton.
Coming up in the science revolution is Mad King Trump deciding which states will live and which states will die. Associate Professor of Economics Pavlina Cherneva is here to talk about what would FDR do about COVID-19. The last Democratic governor of Alabama, Don Siegelman, drops by to talk about how prisons are handling the coronavirus and what they should do. In Geeky Science, attorney and regulatory policy advocate with Public Citizen Amit Narang is here, asking why Trump is fighting clean car standards instead of the coronavirus. Check it all out wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Marty in Evergreen Parks, Illinois. Hey, Marty, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thank you so much for taking my call. And I chimed in last week when I was talking about my dad who was in the hospital with a COVID-19 infection. And I just wanted to thank, anybody who said prayers for me and my family, because my dad has recovered. They let him out of the hospital. He's back at home with us. And, we're all as gracious as can be. I mean, he's, he definitely appreciates how lucky he is to be alive. But I wanted to talk about hydroxychloroquine because, the Trump administration is touting this recklessly as a miracle drug. Now, the only thing I have to say is they did give my father that when he was in the hospital, and he never had to go. They had him on oxygen, but he never progressed to the point where he needed a ventilator. And we're not. Nobody is for sure if that is what made the difference between him, between his lungs, completely filling up with fluid or tiring out or whatever. I just fear that they might be onto something with that. But, who knows? Who knows if he would have had the same outcome if he wouldn't have had that? I mean, I guess that's why, we need to do a lot more testing on that. But I just fear that, he's going to use that, as his ticket into another, term in office. And I hope that's not the case. But
yeah, he has bet large on it, both apparently financially and politically. And hydrochloroquine, and chloroquine are used for lupus because they suppress inflammation. Lupus is a disease where the body's immune system attacks itself, kind of systemically. And so you would think that anything that reduces systemic inflammation, would be a good treatment. Because it's not the disease that kills you; it's the body's overreaction to it that kills you, or at least that's the prevailing thought. And therefore, hydrochloroquine, which is a little less, has fewer side effects than chloroquine. Hydrochloroquine might be useful, and it needs to be tested. The original French study had no controls. And there's a lot of suspicion around it. Plus, the company that owns the patent is a French company, Sanofi. That's the company that Trump is invested in. But, it's entirely possible. One of the things that we learned is that other drugs that just reduce fever, like Advil, for example, ibuprofen, actually make you worse. They're not good for you. But, we need to find out. Marty, I'm so glad to know that your dad's doing better. Thank you very much for calling and sharing that with us, keeping us up to date.
Sure. Thank you again.
Good to hear. You're welcome. Good to hear from you. Cheryl in Pulaski, Illinois. Hey, Cheryl, what's up?
I want to talk about something a little different. And I think as progressives, we have to start pushing back on the myth that capitalism built this country, when in fact, we created socialism in this country at its very basest things. It's called the Homestead Act. And the Homestead Act gave away land for people who had filing fees and improved upon this thing. They built this government. They built the towns. They built the states. They built everything, and it was socialism. Regulated capitalism came along later and reaped the rewards of it, But we as a country bought land for $25 million from France, and we gave it all away, primarily to people who had filing fees only. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the purest form of socialism, and we as progressives should promote that rather than let them tell us it's capitalism, capitalism, capitalism.
Cheryl, I agree with your sentiment that America has always been essentially a socialist country and that we have been at our very best when we've been socialist. I'm not sure that's the best example because that's really colonialism or neocolonialism. All of that land was stolen from people who occupied it, who lived there. That was Native Americans, and then given to white Europeans. So, I would back off that as the example, but I absolutely understand what you're saying. And I love the sentiment. Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl. Sam in Corvallis, Oregon. Hey, Sam, what's up?
Hey, Tom. First-time caller, long-time listener. I got a brief question and a comment for you. My question is about this guy, Sean O'Donnell, who was just appointed as the new independent watchdog guy for the coronavirus funds. I was just having a hard time
Trump fired the existing guy and replaced him. About him, he was the oversight guy for the Pentagon, and Trump has. I'm not sure if he's moved him over to the coronavirus bailout or if he's simply added that to his responsibilities the way he added Mick Mulvaney. You're running OMB, but you're also going to be my chief of staff. So I don't know, Sam. That's something that probably tomorrow I'll have had an opportunity, and the reporters around the country will have had an opportunity to dig into. But I think it's an important story that Trump is basically, he does not like inspector generals. He does not like oversight. And this morning, he trashed the Inspector General for Health and Human Services, saying that she was, because she had written a report saying that hospitals were unable to deal with the overwhelming number of coronavirus cases, and he thought that she was speaking poorly of him or making his administration look bad, and so he was trashing her in his press conference yesterday afternoon, and trashing the reporter who asked the question, and that just it can't stand any longer. I mean, this is just so wrong that he's doing this, but. Anyway, I'm with you. Thank you very much for the call, Sam. Gene in Austin. I'm sorry, Sam. I've got a slight delay here, and I just caught your speaking back at me, but I thought you had gone. Gene in Austin, Texas. Hey, Gene, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I really enjoy your show.
Thank you.
I'm 87 years old, and I'm pretty nervous. First-time caller, but I am a monthly subscriber. I wanted to tell you first how I found you. I was always listening to MSNBC. Rachel Maddow is my favorite. And I thought I would check and see what Fox was saying. Well, I went to my guide and I saw FSTV. I thought it was a Fox. And I found you. So I've been very happy with that. But the main thing I wanted to talk about was I was listening to Meet the Press Daily on Friday, March the 27th, and Chuck was interviewing Colin Arnold. He's the City of New Orleans Director of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, and they were talking about PPEs, and he told Chuck, he said that they had put in an order for PPEs in November when we first saw this coming. And I had never heard anybody say November before. But anyway, I thought I'd throw that out to you and tell you where I got it. I know they're trying to find out who knew what when. But anyway, thank you so much for the show. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you, Gene. That's fascinating. Gary in Minneapolis. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. How are you doing today?
I'm alive and kicking, Gary. What's up?
Good, me too. The information about the arrival of this pandemic has been around for so long. The administration was totally well aware of it before we got our first case. And with what happened in Wisconsin today, it looks like it would be very conceivable that they knew this was coming, and they knew how they didn't invent it or create it or anything like that, but they knew it was coming. They knew the time frame, and they let it go on purpose just to disrupt all the elections.
I doubt that. I think that I agree with you that they knew that this was coming. We now know that Peter Navarro, who is very close to Donald Trump, he's his trade rep. He's the guy who's been personally handling all the negotiations with China. He talks with Trump on a regular basis. Back in January, Peter Navarro was saying this is going to kill 500,000 Americans, and then 2 weeks later he said it could kill 2 million Americans. He was begging with the administration to do something. He was saying we're going to need respirators and personal protective equipment. This is back in January. It's now April. And the Trump administration ignored this, and then Donald Trump went on television and lied through his effing teeth, saying, oh, no, it's just going to magically vanish, and we only have 15 cases, and it's all good, and don't worry, and be happy, and, desperately trying to keep the stock market up. But, how this is going to play out, Gary, whether Trump is going to be held to account for this, I think we're going to see some small glimmer of that in the Wisconsin results. I mean, we'll see, but that's going to tell us a lot about how this is going to play out as a political tool, as the Republicans using this as a political tool. Is there going to be a huge backlash, or are they going to get away with it? Are they going to effectively suppress the Democratic vote in Wisconsin today, or is the Democratic vote in Wisconsin going to overwhelm them? Time will tell. Actually, 24 hours will tell. We'll know tomorrow.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And we'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Tracy in Los Angeles. Hey, Tracy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for taking my call. My concern actually is the fact that, on social media, I'm seeing a lot of people that are sort of looking to the end of April as being the panacea that we're going to open up this country and we're going to be able to get back to normal. And until people really understand that unless everyone in this country has been tested, where we can determine who is negative, who is asymptomatic, it's just unfathomable that anyone would consider, let's say, opening up Disneyland. How can you do that? How can you open up Magic Mountain? How can you literally say, let's get the kids back to school? You don't know if the teacher has been tested and if she's negative or asymptomatic. How can you say that let's open up LA Live and have basketball games at the sport? I mean, there's just so much that we don't know about this virus. And for people to really think that we're going to have this, I survived, the pandemic and all I got was this lousy T-shirt that I'm actually seeing on some of the social media. People want to get back to, pre-pandemic and understanding that there has really been a fundamental change. We cannot look at it that until we have accurate numbers, accurate data where everyone has been tested. And that's just even in California. There are 40 million Americans here. 40 million California. I don't think we've tested 2 million at this point. So how can we even conceive of having baseball games, basketball games, football games? It's even going, what about the workforce? What about people that have more than 10 employees? We can't even consider Congress going back. How can Congress sit in it's just beyond the pale with me. And I don't understand why someone isn't looking beyond what we're currently experiencing and saying, yes, we want to get our country back. We want to get economically back on the footing, but we can't do that until we're able to really resolve this situation, this virus here. They still don't even know how there's so much about it that's not known. And I'm just really fearful that we have. Go ahead, sir. I apologize. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. There's a slight delay, so we tend to talk over each other. I thought you'd stopped. I think that there's two things going on here, Tracy. The first is that I believe that the Trump administration has agreed for a long time now with the Boris Johnson administration in the UK, that the solution to this is herd immunity. That is, once the vast majority of people in the country have been exposed to the disease, about half of people who are exposed get sick. 20% of the people who get sick end up in the hospital. 2% of the people who get sick die or are exposed die. We don't know yet exactly which of those numbers it is. That's really the best way to do it, is to just simply create herd immunity. And you do that by saying, to hell with the old people, to hell with the sick people, to hell with people with hypertension and pre-existing conditions. We're just going to let them die, number one. And number two, Donald Trump's hotels are hemorrhaging money right now. He's had to close all but 2 of them, and the 2 that are open are doing no business functionally at all. And he wants the country back working because he wants people to stay in his hotels again. He wants to start making money again. So I think those are the 2 big variables that are happening, Tracy, and neither are frankly being acknowledged by the American press, and frankly, we need to. We'll be back. It's 49 minutes, coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. David in Spotswood, New Jersey. Hey, David, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on YouTube.
Hey, good afternoon. I'd like to quickly just say what I think is going to happen when we get to the other side of this, and we open up the economy.
Okay.
Obviously, I'll be quick, and you can tell me where I'm wrong or I'm right. I think the most formative fact is that our millennials, which is 100 million of them, are 23 to 35, and it's not being really reported, but that's when families form, and they've been putting off family formation for a long time now, due to student loans and the poor economy. Health insurance premiums are supposed to increase 40%. Right now, there's a moratorium on rent, student loans, and mortgages. That would go away, which is a price support. Pay cuts, 15 to 25%, although it's not in the news. I know from my friends they've been experiencing that. In 12 to 18 months, if we have a vaccine, it's not known if it'll be free or not. And the small businesses are going to have to justify the loans that they're getting at the present time and perhaps pay them back faster than they think. And then there's the unemployment factor. 20 to 50 million people could be out of work, some of whom are getting paid more than they work and don't want to go back, don't want to make less. I'm not saying that on a moral standpoint. I'm just saying economically, they might want to wait to get a job where they can pay their debts. And a sizable number of people will also have immunity at the time, but the majority won't. This could create a disparity between people who have immunity and can go to work and those that don't. Here's what I think is going to happen. The millennials aren't going to take it. They're going to take to the streets, and the women are going to be more aggressive and boldened than the men, or they're going to be more considerate of men protesting, which I've read that was a factor in the 30s. And it's really going to be bad if the power structure tries to get us to a war in Venezuela. I'll let you speak now. Thanks.
Sure. Or a war in Iran. It's interesting. In China right now, it's the millennials, the Chinese version of millennials, who are speaking out against the government and who are out protesting. And, we're doing minor riots, frankly, in the Wuhan area. I don't have a crystal ball, David. What I do know is that we are functionally right now, in terms of unemployment and the economy shutting down, we're in worse shape right now than the Great Depression. Now, the circumstances are quite different, and so it's really hard to draw analogies. Franklin Roosevelt got us out of the Great Depression, but it took a decade, and it was a lot of bottom-up stuff, and ultimately World War II, this massive government stimulus program got us out of the Great Depression. Now, the Fed is a lot smarter and a lot more powerful now than they were in the 1930s. In the 1930s, they were only 20 years old and didn't really know how to use the power that they had. And so the Fed has declared that they're going to buy up to $4 trillion worth of bad corporate debt. So this wave of corporate bankruptcies that in the 1930s destroyed the banking system and shut down the country, that wave of corporate bankruptcies is probably just going to be absorbed by the Fed, and it'll just seem to vanish from public view. I think the Fed has been buying stocks. They announced a few days ago that they were going to start buying equities, stocks, and I think that that's one of the things that's driving the stock market up. Whether this is a Ponzi scheme, essentially, whether it's going to crash, or whether this is a bridge that's going to get us to that period in time where there is a certain amount of herd immunity and there are people going back to work because they are post illness. I don't know. I think you could build a strong scenario for either one of them. But I think as political creatures and the Democratic Party in particular need to be planning for what the next steps are. We can't just talk about we've got to do endless bailouts. There's got to be the next step after that. And I think that's a rich topic for conversation. David, thanks. That was a very thoughtful analysis. Mitchell in Las Vegas. Hey, Mitchell, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, I'm just worried about our next vote. I think that we ought to be working on getting the vote right away now and not putting it off. I think this coronavirus is a big, it's deadly and very serious, but they've got to start working on vote by mail.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you, and this is, we had Ron Wyden on the show a couple of weeks ago because he introduced legislation to basically require all the states to send a ballot to all their people. If people still want to show up at the polling place, fine, but everybody gets a ballot, and that's absolutely what we need. Thank you for the call. Tom in Tomahawk, Wisconsin. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I'm just thinking to myself, where is President Obama in all this? It means we need.
Well, he's out of office. He's respectfully.
What's going on?
He's respectfully standing back and letting the Trump controls the instrument of government. So Trump has the information. Trump has the access to national security information. I'm assuming Obama's still getting national security briefings. Ex-presidents typically do, but they typically don't talk about it. I think Barack Obama, President Obama, is basically appropriately keeping his head down. Anything he says right now, Trump will turn into something partisan. Trump hates Obama with a burning passion. I think, frankly, it's more envy than hate, but it comes across as hatred. And so I think President Obama would be doing probably himself a disservice if he tried to play the role that, for example, Governor Cuomo is doing. So we'll see where this goes, Tom. And I get what you're saying, and I absolutely understand the sentiment. There needs to be a national voice that is speaking back to Donald Trump. I think that Andrew Cuomo is acceptable to the corporate media. He's a corporate Democrat. But beyond that, he is on the front line. His state is the one that's getting hammered. He's the one who has been basically talking back to Trump. And God bless him for it. I want to see more of it. I don't want to see him as our president, but I do want to see, Democrats who are standing up to Trump in the media. And I'm sick and tired of seeing this pathetic, lie-filled BS dog and pony reality show every afternoon on television. I'm just so tired of having to get up and go turn the TV over to BBC to get away from that whiny voice. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Beyond the Valley, How Innovators Around the World Are Overcoming Inequality and Creating the Technologies of Tomorrow by Ramesh Srinivasan. This is from the introduction. Sergio, a friend of mine from Argentina, recently completed a trip around the world. I met him last year in southern Mexico, where I'd been visiting regularly since 2016 to learn from indigenous communities who have been creating their own digital networks. My visits there were inspired by my too long-decade fascination with the internet and digital technology's rapid development. First as an engineer and later as an educator and researcher, exploring how digital technologies impact the lives of diverse cultures and societies. Sergio had not traveled extensively outside of his country before. When we met at a food vendor's table on a street in Oaxaca, he was buzzing with the excitement of having visited 5 continents and holding various jobs as a carpenter and farmer, for instance, or in the service industry at hotels and restaurants in just the past year. When I asked him about his range of experiences in parts of the world so different from where he grew up in working-class Buenos Aires, he made an offhand remark that stopped me in my tracks. Regardless of where you go, he said, people get pushed into the internet. That is what they want. After we parted ways, Sergio's comments stayed with me. I was struck by the contrasting but intertwined images it contained. The first being of people thrust into some alternative universe that exists beyond our screens. The second being of people who relate to the internet as a place where we share common ground. Like many of us, Sergio had the perspective of a user, simultaneously awed but also perplexed by the characteristic pushiness in which websites, mobile apps, virtual reality headsets, and a myriad of other digital devices have appeared and made their way into our lives. I wrote this book as a way to explore how we, the billions of internet users, can respond to the sea change that transformed an open world of online possibilities into something else altogether, a digital landscape of walled gardens and predetermined paths already programmed for us, for which we have little visibility or control. If we're going to turn over our lives to these devices and systems, shouldn't we at the minimum have power over how they're designed and profited from? Shouldn't technology be people-centered, not in use and addiction, but in creation and application? As access to the internet and cell phones expands around the world, so too does the power and wealth of but a very few technology companies located on the west coast of the United States and in China. These companies offer services that have, without question, created value for their billions of users, providing efficient and economical ways for us to find and disseminate information, telecommute to our jobs, socialize with one another, and buy and sell goods. Many of us love the cheap prices on Amazon and how quickly the products we purchase arrive at our doorstep. Others believe that things like surveillance cameras, GPS tracking of people using smartphones, and the use of shared data to apprehend terrorists provide great value. But we may not also recognize that in the process we give up our individual rights to privacy, put our most vulnerable members of society at risk, threaten the viability of small businesses, and contribute to greater economic inequality and political division. In domesticating the wild west of the internet, the big tech companies have provided a vibrant market of beneficial tools and services for users and amassed unimaginable wealth for their executives and stockholders. But in the process, they have also supplanted the open democratic internet with a vast network of privately owned architecture. Imagine digital fences, highways, roads, bridges, and walls whose sole purpose is to control people's movement through digital space in ways that benefit their company's bottom line. Clinging to this idea of an open internet obscures the reality. The digital world is structured by static, hefty, and inflexible digital architectures. And like invisible borders, they enforce specific paths. We are increasingly aware, of course, that the phones and websites linking us to a wider world keep track of us, even when we're not using them, and that our personal data is vulnerable to covert collection and monetization. We have also experienced the amplification and rapid spread of propaganda, misinformation, and hate speech on the internet, too often with tragic results, all of which distract us from facts, contexts, and multiple points of view. Meanwhile, journalists, activists, scholars, and more of the public are raising concerns that Chinese, Western, and white male interests dominate the content and systems that power the internet rather than those who reflect the full diversity of all of us who are online. Finally, against the backdrop of profound economic inequality around the world, we have seen how the expansion of the gig economy has made work, wages, and benefits less secure than ever before, even as digital automation threatens to eliminate much of the current job market. I, like so many of us, derive incredible value from the services and products provided by Amazon, Google, Apple, Microsoft, and Facebook. But I also know that I've agreed to their terms of service without understanding exactly what I have given up in exchange for what I am getting. I am not being given the means to think through the downstream implications of my actions, even for myself, much less for others in my networks. As an example, Amazon has made it so inexpensive and easy to buy almost anything that almost all of us use the site regularly. The Chinese Alibaba is no different. But is it okay that both these companies have monopolistically overtaken an open marketplace? The book is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program. And the essence of it is, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State where the police officers hogtied this guy, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!
Exposed on a daily basis. And one of the strongest stereotypes in American society associates blacks with criminality. And she continues. The book is Biased by Jennifer L. Eberhard, and it's great.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Local communities are standing up, and in some cases standing up for the rights of nature. An extraordinary process, an extraordinary event. Thomas Lindsay, the senior counsel for the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights, CDER, Center for Environmental Rights.org, and CDER_org is the Twitter handle, is with us. Thomas, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Tom.
So tell me about this story here with this Pennsylvania victory.
Yeah, so it goes back a while, back to 2014. Folks may not know, but the fracking explosion in the United States, this hydrofracking for natural gas that's occurred in the country, produced about 189 billion gallons of fracking wastewater in the United States, and that's equivalent to 14 and a half days of Niagara Falls basically falling into the earth. And so fracking companies have been taking this carcinogenic, heavy metal-laden, radioactive fracking waste and dumping it into the ground. And so that's produced about 36,000 oil and gas wastewater injection wells across the United States, with one of those planned for this very small community of 700 people in a place called Grant Township in western Pennsylvania. And starting in 2014, the folks in Grant Township, not wanting to be used as a toilet for this kind of fracking waste, decided to adopt a local law with our help to ban wastewater from being injected into the township. And when they passed the law, of course, as happens often with communities that pass these kinds of bans in the face of a state or federal permit that's been issued for these kinds of operations, they were sued by a company called Pennsylvania General Energy. And eventually their local law was overturned by a federal judge who also cited the township for payment of monies for violating the corporation's constitutional rights by refusing to allow the frac wastewater injection well from coming in, and also fined the two lawyers that were representing Grant, and I was one of them, $52,000 for daring to raise the legal argument that the locality should have the power to say no to this kind of harmful activity or project coming into the municipality. And so it's been a long saga in Grant Township, but it didn't stop with the federal court's order overturning their local law. They adopted what's known as a home rule charter, which is in essence a local constitution for their community, and reinstated the ban that the federal judge had overturned. So pretty much in open defiance of the federal court, decided to draft a local constitution that had this ban language in it that the federal judge had overturned. And I think to everybody's amazement, in some ways, in mid-March, the state agency, the Department of Environmental Protection, which had originally issued the state permit to the facility to go into Grant Township, reversed itself and decided to revoke the permit on the basis of the locality's adoption of that ban within their home rule charter in the municipality.
Was that a political decision or a legal one?
Well, the fact is we don't know, but in the letter that was sent out from the state agency, it specifically referenced the locality's ban and said that under Pennsylvania law, under the regulations they were operating under, that they were forbidden by law from issuing a permit that would violate other law. And for the last 40 years, the DEP has not, these state agencies really haven't seen local laws as having viable bans. So when they talk about issuing permits that would violate law, they've pretty much been talking just about state law. But this was a legal interpretation that the locality's ordinance, the locality's home rule charter that bans injection wells, actually was binding on the state agency, that they were acquiescing to that provision. And so in that respect, it's a pretty big deal. It's only happened once or twice before. But in this context, it was a state agency basically recognizing that a locality has the right to ban these types of harmful activities from coming in.
Right, but this was the state agency recognizing that rather than a court. So the state agency could have just said, you know, these people are going to fight us no matter what we do. They're a pain in the butt. Let's find another town that is not so activist, a town filled with people who watch Fox News, and we'll just inject the poison under their houses instead of these people's houses.
Yes, absolutely, which is what the companies have been doing up until now, which is shipping the waste to Ohio. So this is the first set of wastewater injection wells that were scheduled for Pennsylvania. But in reality, what it does is it takes the state agency off the side of the corporation and basically forces the corporation to now not be in a position where they can use the state agency to force the project in. So I think it's the beginning of a turn. Yeah, beginning of a turn towards legal recognition of these kinds of local rights. And I have to say that, we've worked over the past couple of weeks on the COVID-19, the novel coronavirus stuff that's happening in different places. And while a lot of our work is focused on environmental issues, this legal doctrine of localities being able to override the state when they provide for expanded protections for human health and the natural environment, I think you see the same situation arising in places like Tupelo and Jackson in Mississippi, where the Mississippi governor has overridden cities in Mississippi from doing shelter-in-place orders. And so I think this doctrine that we've developed, which was the law of the land back in the 1800s, but somehow has been forgotten, that localities, the argument is that localities, municipalities can't be preempted, overridden by the state, if they seek to provide expanded or heightened public health and environmental protections for people and nature within their municipality. So it's an exciting kind of new movement built around this local control concept in which cities are kind of in the lead and municipalities are in the lead, whereas the state is overridden in these cases under this legal doctrine.
I think the last time we talked, Thomas, was, at least here on the air, was around the time that Lake Erie was being recognized as having rights, the rights of nature. In the 2 minutes or so we have left, where is that at, and how is this movement spreading across the United States?
So the Lake Erie Bill of Rights was the subject of a lawsuit brought 24 hours after the people of Toledo overwhelmingly passed it. And unfortunately, a federal court overturned the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. Folks are still deciding whether to appeal the decision or how to move. But the Lake Erie Bill of Rights stuff has led to other efforts like those in Florida, where a dozen counties, including the 30th largest county in the United States, Orange County, 5th largest in Florida, has now voted to place a Rights of Nature initiative onto the countywide ballot in November. And so I think the worthiness of places like the Lake Erie Bill of Rights in Toledo is that it has birthed, in some ways, a new acceleration of rights of nature laws in places like Florida, where you have this fairly massive movement now moving to deal with and recognize rights of nature for rivers, bays, and estuaries.
Yeah. Is has this been through federal courts yet?
No, the Florida stuff is on the verge of challenging some preemptive authority by the state. It's fascinating to watch as the corporations use state legislators to try to preempt these measures from moving forward. I think in some ways that is the thing that shows them as the most effective and that they're a real threat. The Florida House and Senate about a month ago passed bills to specifically preempt rights of nature laws from being adopted in Florida. So we'll see what happens next.
Yeah. Well, keep us up to date on it. It's great talking with you. Thomas Lindsay, he's the senior counsel with the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights, CDER, Center for FOR, environmentalrights.org is the website, CDER_org. Thank you, Thomas.
Thanks, Tom.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. Travis in Centerville, Virginia. Hey, Travis, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Tom?
Yeah.
Oh, hey, sorry. Hey, I guess this whole situation, this current event, this leads extra ammo for your argument for vegetarianism. I'm not a vegetarian myself, but this virus came from wet market, and if people were to, I guess, rely more on vegetables and vegetation for subsistence instead of meat, maybe we'll have less of these outbreaks. What do you think about that?
I completely agree. And in fact, we're going to be doing a show on this either later this week or early next. We're trying to track down one of these experts on zoonotic diseases. Some of the worst diseases that have ravaged humankind have come from animals. And, the question of, what role does animal agriculture play in this, in the virus and all this other? I mean, there's a whole bunch of, I think, very, very legitimate questions that need to be answered and that we need to do a deep dive into. And the extent that we're continuing to farm animals in an industrial form, particularly mammals, is very troubling. I'm with you. Travis, thank you for the call. That's well said. Chris in Middlefield, Massachusetts. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, thanks for taking my call. I guess it centers around some confusion as to our military and its role. I believe our president is supposed to protect the population, but what is the military's role? Do they only protect us if the enemy is outside the border? What if we have the enemy on the inside of the border?
Define enemy. Are you talking about sedition, or are you talking about viruses?
I'm talking about our government, our present government.
Yeah.
I.e.,
I think
his.
Sure. Generally speaking, I mean, it's the duty of the federal government, at least the executive branch, to execute the laws. There's no place in the Constitution, to the best of my knowledge, where it says that the job of the president is to keep America safe. But, if Congress is passing appropriate legislation, and if the White House, if the executive branch is executing that is putting those laws into place and managing a national, the whole federal response, then that would be the consequence of it. And so, that's where we need to work as we're moving forward. Chris, thanks for the call. Annie in Watertown, Wisconsin. Hey, Annie, thanks for listening to WRRD. What's up?
Our Supreme Court went from one of the finest admired ones to just dirt. But the last gal that ran, she had her picture taken in orange hunting. But this guy, Dan Kelly, one of his campaign photos, he's holding an AR-15. So what that has to do with being a judge.
Well, this is the guy that Donald Trump just tweeted out about an hour ago saying, protect your Second Amendment rights, vote for, I don't even want to say this guy's name on the air, but vote for him. And he called him out by name. I'm with you, Annie. I'm disgusted by the whole thing. But the NRA is pushing hard for this. He's their guy. It's 4-2 on the state Supreme Court right now, conservatives to liberals. And if he loses, it becomes 3-3, and that effectively cripples their ability to use the Supreme Court to legislate essentially in Washington. Annie, thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Hey, we have a new video up for the supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. I really enjoy doing these separate from what we're doing on the air because sometimes I can say things that would be impolitic or inappropriate to say on the air. Like the name of the website that I'm talking about in this video, and I lay it out and share it with you on the video. It's ratbleepingthecourts.com, and the bleeping, of course, is a word that you just can't say on the air that starts with F. And this website is just outing these judges that Donald Trump and the Federalist Society have been sending through Mitch McConnell's Senate like a friggin' assembly line, and how unqualified they are, how hateful they are, how aggressively they've worked to screw students, to deny. Well, one of them actually said that women who are on birth control pills, that should be reason to fire people. Right? I mean, it's just insane. You can check it out over at thomhartmann.com.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And just wanted to get into some of the remnants of the news here. As I mentioned earlier, the Supreme Court has said, yes, we will hear Donald Trump and the Republican governor's efforts to destroy the Affordable Care Act, where that's fine with us. We're totally down with that. We'd be glad to hear these arguments. Meanwhile, the Secretary of the Navy, this guy, Thomas Modly, M-O-D-L-Y, or Modly, he went down and he gave this god-awful speech to the crew members, trashing is it Crozier or Crozier? I'm not sure. Captain Brett Crozier, trashing him. And, I mean, you just don't do that. Right? I mean, he was a beloved commander. He wrote a letter saying, help save my seamen, my members of the Navy here, my fellow shipmates, help save them, and he got fired for that. And then this fool Modly goes down, the acting Navy secretary. He's never even been before Congress. He's not had hearings or anything. He does have a naval background. I suppose that's better than nothing, but. He goes to the ship and he trashes this guy, and now Tammy Baldwin, the Democratic senator from Illinois, is calling for Modly to be fired immediately or to resign. Now, Modly has issued an apology, but it's not an apology for what he said. He apologized for people misunderstanding what he said, which is not an apology. So, anyhow, the task and purpose was the publication that published the leaked audio. And, Defense Secretary Mark Esper is the guy who can remove him, and he should. And if we had a government that was at all responsive, or if we had a military chain of command that was more concerned about its personnel than it was about the feelings of tender little orange blob, Donald Trump, then, maybe things would be different. According to a new study, Donald Trump, this is fascinating, in election. This is from The Atlantic, piece by Mark Elias called How to Fix Our Voting Rules Before November. It's from April 5th. A couple days ago. And he says slight adjustments in the rules can tilt the game of politics essentially for or against specific players. He starts out with the sports story, the 3-point free throw line, I think it's called, 3-point line. Back in 1979, the NBA adopted that. And suddenly there was a shift in which teams had the advantage, because the teams that had the tallest players and the longest reach and the best long shots suddenly had an advantage on the basketball field. He points out that similarly, if your name is listed first on the ballot, you get a 1.7% increase in the vote. And in Florida, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, Trump was listed first on the ballot, and he won by less than 1.7%. Another recent study showed that increasing the number of days of early in-person voting particularly increased turnout among women and voters in their 20s. According to the authors, if every state in 2016 had 23 days of early voting, Hillary Clinton would have easily won Florida, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and the presidency. Now, what they haven't done is determined how vote by mail, how the ability to vote by mail influences that. And frankly, they've got a couple of states, Washington State and Oregon, where we've had vote by mail now for over a decade. That would be easy to examine, the differences before and after and the differences between us and, say, another state with a high level of civic engagement like California. But what the Republicans know, why you saw the Republican-controlled Wisconsin State Supreme Court say, no, we're willing to put our senior citizens at risk of death in order to preserve a Republican majority on the Supreme Court, and why you saw the 5 right-wingers on the U.S. Supreme Court say essentially the same thing, is because they know that if everybody in the United States were to vote, as Donald Trump said, you'd never see a Republican elected to office again. Now that, of course, coming out of Trump's mouth is an exaggeration, but you're not going to see another Republican president for a long, long time. Frankly, the majority of people have not voted for a Republican for president since 1988, when they voted for George Herbert Walker Bush. I mean, that was it. That was the last time that a Republican actually won the majority vote in the United States. In Wisconsin, the Democrats, more people voted for Democrats for the state Senate, for the state House, for governor, for everything. More people voted for Democrats in the last election than voted for Republicans, yet the Republicans in Wisconsin continue to control the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court because of gerrymandering, because of these radical policies that, the Koch brothers' little puppet, Scott Walker, put into place. So, we have to make as goal one, as job one, as our number one main project, to have vote by mail all across the United States in time for the November election. We've got to make that a top priority. Ironically, by the way, the Wisconsin Supreme Court that said, we're going to force people to go vote today, at the top of their website it says, in an effort to protect the public, attorneys, court staff, and judges from the health risks associated with COVID-19, the Wisconsin courts have issued orders temporarily suspending in-person proceedings statewide with certain limited exceptions. In other words, you can't be in person in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which just requires you to be in person in front of a voting machine.
To the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
With these Republicans, it just never ends. We'll be back with your calls after this. We're hitting the break at the bottom of the hour. It's coming up on 28 minutes past that.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is No Visible Bruises, What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us by Rachel Louise Snyder. I'm reading from the preface. This is page 4. Suzanne and I exchanged small talk on her brother's driveway that day in 2010. She and the family were still in preparation and packing mode for their annual camping vacation into the hinterlands of Maine. And Suzanne had been greeted by her brother Andre with a long shopping list. She had told me she worked for a domestic violence agency in town and that they had recently developed a new program that she was calling the Domestic Violence High Risk Team. Their primary aim was simple, she said. We try to predict domestic violence homicides before they happen so we can prevent them. It sounded immediately implausible. So implausible, in fact, that I thought I'd misheard some elemental piece of it. Predict, I remember saying? You said predict domestic violence homicides? I had come across domestic violence in my reporting over the years, not only in Cambodia, but also in places like Afghanistan, Niger, and Honduras. But it had never been a focus for me. Instead, it was always adjacent to whatever other story I was writing, so much so that it was practically banal. The young girls jailed for love crimes in Kabul, the Indian child brides who gave interviews only in front of the men who controlled them, the Tibetan women forcibly sterilized by the Chinese government, the teenage brides in Niger cast from their villages after post-pregnancy fistulas made them pariahs, the Romanian women forced to give to birth multiple children under Ceausescu and who now in their early 30s were grandmothers fated to poverty, the Cambodian street workers beaten and gang-raped for weekend sport by well-heeled Khmer teenagers. All of these women in every country were brutalized and controlled by men as a matter of routine. Men made the rules, primarily through physical violence. It was there, lurking in practically every story I'd ever covered around the world, a shadowy background so obvious I didn't even have to ask about it most of the time. It was as common as rain. Until that moment in the driveway with Suzanne Dubas, if I thought of domestic violence in the United States at all, I saw it as an unfortunate fate for the unlucky few, a matter of bad choices and cruel environments. A woman hardwired to be hurt, a man hardwired to hurt. But I never envisioned it as a social ill, an epidemic we can actually do something about. Now here was Susan Dubas talking about preventative measures for a type of violence that, for the first time, I saw operating along a continuum. The young girl in India married as a child, the Tibetan woman sterilized, the Afghan woman jailed, the housewife in Massachusetts brutalized by her husband. They all shared a common privation, what domestic violence victims across the world lacked, agency in their own lives. The forces that brought a Cambodian prostitute to the brink of death were the same forces that killed thousands of women and children and men, but mostly women and children, across America and the entire globe every year. On average, in fact, of 137 women each and every day are killed by intimate partner or familial violence across the globe, and this does not include men or children. Everything in my body suddenly came alive that day. I saw all the faces of women around the world from over 2 decades of work, and I realized how rarely I'd gazed inward at my own country, at what we got wrong and what it meant. The universality of domestic violence and how it crisscrosses geographical, cultural, and linguistic barriers. Maybe all those other stories were in preparation for the day that I'd meet Paul Monson and look at the mountains from his living room windows. I ended up following Suzanne to the farmer's market and then to the grocery store and then to the liquor store as she prepped for her camping trip. I helped her carry ice and peaches and hamburger meat. I asked question after question while she drove and while her mother Pat sat in the passenger seat, chiming in here and there. How did it work? How many have you stopped? What else can you predict? My questions were vast and endless. Like many people who hold a casual acquaintance with a problem, I believed all the common assumptions. That if things were bad enough, victims would just leave. That restraining orders solved the problem. And that if a victim didn't show up to renew a restraining order, the problem had been solved. That going to a shelter was an adequate response for victims and their children. That violence inside the home was something private, unrelated to other forms of violence, perhaps most notably mass shootings. That a lack of visible injury signaled a lack of seriousness. And perhaps most of all, that unless we stand at the receiving end of a punch, such violence had nothing to do with us at all. Over the next few years, Suzanne Dubas and her colleague Kelly Dunn patiently taught me about the scope and history of an issue that still today is too often hidden. I learned why past approaches had failed and what we could do more effectively today. Between 2000 and 2006, 3,200 American soldiers were killed. During that same period, domestic homicide in the United States claimed 10,600 lives. This figure is likely an underestimate, as it was pulled from the FBI's supplementary homicide reports, which gather data from local police departments, and participation is voluntary. 20 people in the United States are assaulted every minute by their partners. Former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan called violence against women and girls the most shameful human rights violation, and the World Health Organization called it a global health problem of epidemic proportions. A study put out by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime cited 50,000 women around the world were killed by partners or family members in 2017 alone. 50,000 women. The UNODC report called Home the most dangerous place for women. The book No Visible Bruises by Rachel Louise Snyder.
Coming up in the science revolution is Mad King Trump deciding which states will live and which states will die. Associate Professor of Economics Pavlina Cherneva is here to talk about what would FDR do about COVID-19. The last Democratic governor of Alabama, Don Siegelman, drops by to talk about how prisons are handling the coronavirus and what they should do. In Geeky Science, attorney and regulatory policy advocate with Public Citizen Amit Narang is here, asking why Trump is fighting clean car standards instead of the coronavirus. Check it all out wherever fine podcasts are available. So Donald Trump has just deployed Patriot missiles to Iraq and pointed them at Iran. Has gone out of his way to threaten Iran, saying that they will pay a very heavy price. You know, if any of their proxy groups, any of the Iranian-supported militias or groups, this is basically the Shiites, the majority of the population of Iraq. In Iraq, if any of them were to attack American forces, Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo will use this as an excuse to launch a war against Iran. This is insane. The New York Times is reporting military commanders, the Pentagon has ordered military commanders to plan for an escalation of American combat in Iraq, in the region, and, quote, prepare a campaign to destroy an Iranian-backed militia group that has threatened more attacks against American troops. You know, we crippled their country with sanctions, and now we're threatening a war so that Trump can get reelected. There's a video about it over at ThomHartmann.com for our supporters. Well, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Fascinating stuff going on. At 11:45 a.m. this morning, that was about 2.5 hours ago, almost 3 hours ago, tweeted an article about Elizabeth Warren. It's from Vox. It's titled, Elizabeth Warren Has a Plan for This Too. And President Obama tweeted this on his personal account, at Barack Obama, at 115 million followers. Tweeted, as she often does, at Sen Warren, at Senator Warren, he name checks her, or Twitter handle checks her right there in the tweet. As she often does, Senator Warren provides a cogent summary of how federal policymakers should be thinking about the pandemic in the coming months. Now, when the guy who is arguably the head of the Democratic Party, he certainly was when he was president, and he has not been replaced by another Democratic president. When the guy who is one of the most highly respected and revered members of the Democratic Party, he's got cred on the progressive side, he's got cred on the more conservative side and the corporate side. I mean, Barack Obama has managed brilliantly to be kind of all things to all people. When that man reaches out and doesn't say, hey, Joe Biden's got a great plan for the coronavirus epidemic, although Joe does. He doesn't say, hey, Bernie Sanders has got a great plan. He doesn't say, hey, Kamala Harris or Stacey Abrams. He's not name checking any of those people. He's giving a shout out to Elizabeth Warren. Why would that be? Is it that he's concerned that Joe Biden can't go the whole way, or that he may be maybe there should be a plan B in case Joe gets sick or something happens, God forbid. Or the same for Bernie, I suppose. They're both older white guys or older guys. Elizabeth Warren, though, if she's not 70, she's close to it. But she is a bundle of energy, and she doesn't come across as 70. She comes across as mid-50s. So is he talking about, hey, here's our plan B for the Democratic Party, here's my preference? Or is this his way of signaling to Joe Biden, hey, Joe, I know you're thinking about, vice president, and here's my suggestion? Or did he just see an article and he had too much coffee this morning and he was all jacked up and thought, I got to share this with people. Oh, boy, look at this. Which is, how I tend to tweet in the morning. Which is it? I honestly don't have a clue. But there's a lot of theorizing going on, and there's a great thread, actually, about this. The thing that flagged me to this originally over on Daily Kos was Markos Moulitsas himself tweeting, basically that same kind of speculation. It's like, what's going on here? Oh, this is interesting. And one other thing I want to share with you, and then I'll pick up your phone calls here. There is going to be a pink moon tonight. These are called supermoons. It's not actually pink, it's actually orange. Now, there's some people who think that when the moon turns orange, that's going to be the end of the world. Actually, that's not the case. It's when your president turns orange, that's the end of the world. When the moon turns orange, or pink, as it will tonight, all over the world, it's an astrological phenomena. But, it could mean, it's got pink hue. It's got, this is the same time that you have pink cherry blossoms all across Washington, D.C. Who knows? Who knows? The phrase pink moon, this is from The Sun. The phrase pink moon comes from northern Native Americans, according to the Old Farmer's Almanac. They named it after a spring flower called the wild ground phlox, which is native to eastern U.S. and one of the earliest widespread flowers of spring. It's got a pink hue and blossoms around the same time as April's full moon. This natural phenomenon is also linked, or is always linked, to the date of Easter because it appears after the spring equinox. So therefore, sometimes it's referred to as the egg moon, the full sprouting grass moon, the growing moon, or the full fish moon. But whatever it is, you might want to check it out tonight if you've got clear skies wherever you live. It looks like it's sure to be fascinating. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Not much. I think it's...
Hey, Bill? I am not hearing Bill. I'm going to put him back on hold. He's on line 5. Oh, there you go. Hang on, Bill.
Can you hear me?
Let me put you back on the air here. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Go for it. We've got our time delay is getting a little worse here. You're on.
That's okay. I believe it's zoonautics, like zoology is the way it's pronounced.
Go for it, Bill. You're on the air.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me? Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Really? I always pronounce that zoology. Yes, I can hear you. And, there's about a go ahead.
Yeah, but what I was saying...
Okay, Bill, apparently your delay is worse than my delay, so I'm going to put you on hold and so you can figure out what's going on. Damon in Las Vegas. Hey, Damon, what's on your mind today?
Well, Sweden stopped using chloroquine because they said it caused a whole bunch of side effects. So the hospitals are using them. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Wow.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you just fine. Please don't ask that anymore. Just assume that you're on the air because there's this almost a 2-second delay now that's making us all crazy. Damon, I'm going to move along to Russ in Portland. Hey, Russ, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, I wanted to thank you for bringing up the deplorable, disgraceful situation with this Republican clown, Thomas Modly. The only reason this guy is acting Secretary of the Navy is he's an investment banker who gave a lot of money to Trump's presidential campaign. This guy and the president that put him in there could not carry the piss bucket of Captain and Commander Brett Crozier. There's a much bigger thing going on here than just this disgraceful situation yesterday where where Moodley flies 8,000 miles. And by the way, if anybody with the Democratic administration had done this, the Republicans like Rand Paul would be screaming about the cost. But he goes 8,000 miles not only to trash Crozier, but to trash the men and women that serve on the aircraft carrier who cheered Crozier when he walked off the carrier last week after he had been fired. But as I said, this goes much further. And I'd just like to read really quickly 2-sentence paragraph from the New York Times. Like much of the Trump administration, what began as a seemingly straightforward challenge, the arrival of coronavirus on board a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, has now engulfed the military, leading to far-reaching questions of undue command influence and the demoralization of young men and women who promise to protect the country. At its heart, this crisis aboard the Theodore Roosevelt has become a window into what matters and what does not in an administration where remaining on the right side of a mercurial, I would say bat-crap crazy, mercurial president is valued above all else. If this guy gets reelected, you're going to see a situation where all of the people in the military are going to be required to sign a loyalty oath to the dear leader. And this is endangering our national security. This is big stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Russ. And you know, Donald Trump doesn't care about the military, except that, you know, to the extent that he can use them as props for his reelection. Really, he doesn't care about anything or anyone except himself and his own political future. And Russ, thank you. I was just looking at our delay. Apparently, it's up to 3 seconds right now. This is how heavily loaded the internet is as a consequence of that. So, you know, when I put you on the air, just assume you're on the air and just start talking like Russ just did. He just did a great job to finish your rant and then toss it back to me. You know, we all have to make some compensations here as we wander into this, or as we are thrust into this worldwide pandemic. Something that, you know, it's like out of a Michael Crichton novel. You know, it's like, who would have imagined? It's like we're all hiding in our houses because the wolf is out there ravaging the countryside. We're the zombies.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Stick around, we'll be right back. And welcome back. Jack in Cortez, Colorado. You are on the air, Jack. What's your rant today?
Hey, good afternoon. Hey, there are a couple quotes from George Orwell that just seem to apply right now. One of them was, the people will believe what the media tells them they believe. And the other one is, in a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And I think that's very important to think about. And thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm with you. Those are great, Jack. You're welcome. Thank you for the call. Jeff in Port St. Lucie, Florida. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Hope everyone's safe. Quick question. Well, quick opinion. The Wisconsin election today, another slant. And I agree with you what they're trying to do. But could it help for the general, because we've heard that Trump and his team may try to halt or postpone the general due to the coronavirus if it's still going on and people are not getting into the polls. Now, isn't the precedent set that they can't do that? You follow what I'm saying?
By these two Supreme Court decisions, even the state and the federal court decisions, the U.S. Supreme Court was very careful to say that they were very narrowly interpreting a small piece of the law, of Wisconsin state law. And I haven't read the Supreme Court decision from Wisconsin's Supreme Court, but I'm guessing they took the same position. You know, we're just technocrats here. We're just we're not going to look at the big picture of a pandemic or anything like that. We're just going to look at this little piece of law and decide on it. And so whether that would have application to the ability of a governor or of the president to mess with our elections come November, I'm skeptical. I doubt it, Jeff.
Okay, just a thought. I was just trying to get out some positive out of it. So,
yeah.
Thank you.
No, it's all good. Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot for the call. Yeah, I appreciate it. By the way, another story I wanted to share with you. It's called This is from Daily Kos by Mark Sumner. Mark is just, one of the smartest guys out there, and his stuff is always so worth reading over on Daily Kos. I'm a big fan of Mark's. And Gabe Ortiz. I mean, they're Hunter and Marcos himself. There's some just really great talent over there at Daily Kos. And he's got this piece called Keeping Your Dead. The true toll of COVID-19 is being undercounted, including in New York. And his point is that if you die at home from COVID, you're not listed as a COVID death. If you die in the ambulance on the way to the hospital from COVID, you're not listed as a COVID death. They're not even bringing heart attack victims back to the hospital to try to resuscitate them anymore, which has dramatically collapsed the need for hospital beds in New York City. They're just saying, oh, he had a heart attack. We're just going to, and he's no longer breathing. We're just going to let him die rather than get him to the hospital and try to revive him or her. And a lot of these people are actually dying of COVID-19 because one of the ways that it kills people is it attacks the heart muscle as aggressively, in some cases, as it attacks lung tissue. And so people have heart attacks. And they're not diagnosed as COVID-19, they're diagnosed as heart attacks. So basically what he's saying, and what the news is telling us, frankly, is that the actual death toll here in the United States is much higher than we think it is. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a minute. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I was just looking at the little delay indicator on my fancy contraption here that lets us get our show to you from my home, and it's counting down. It's showing that we've got about a 2-second, maybe a 1.5 second delay right now on the phone lines. So, when I put you on the air and say go, just go. Gail in Antelope, California. Hey, Gail, what's on your mind today?
Okay, got a news flash for you. I came across a story yesterday. Trump, the reason he's promoting this malaria drug, and he's been touting it, he's buddies with Novartis, who is the major drug maker for that particular drug. That guy, the CEO of Novartis, was under investigation by Mueller when that was going on for a $1.6 million contribution he made to Trump through a shell company set up by Michael Cohen. And the article said that since Trump's been promoting this malaria drug, the CEO's salary has gone up by 59% of that company.
Plus, the Trump Family Foundation, 3 different Trump Family Foundations own stock in Sinophyl, which is the company in France, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, but that holds the patent to the brand name for chloroquine, and Novartis makes the generic version. So yeah, double bingo, Gail. Thank you for that. That's an excellent one. Tim in Shelby Township, Michigan. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Yes, can the Democrats hold up part of the funding due to lack of oversight now on the stimulation bills?
They cannot. That would require a whole new piece of legislation. All they can do is yell and scream from the sidelines. They have basically handed the money off to the administration, and and that's the end of that. I mean, sadly, but that's where it's at. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Want to try it again, Bill?
Yes, please. As mentioned before, one of the most mispronounced words is zoology. People add another O to make it zoology for some reason. But the other thing is that I think that it's time for us to do a big push with this election to get more senators and a president so that we can add 2 more Supreme Court justices to balance it out. And the last thing is, if I was dictator, I'd require everybody to wear 12-foot hoop skirts when they go outside.
I love it, 12-foot hoop skirts. That's a good one. Thank you, Bill. Ivan in Bartlett, Illinois. Hey, Ivan, you're on the air.
Thank you, Tom. So what we have in Wisconsin is the GOP, the corporate Democrat Joe Biden, and the United States Supreme Court saying, ignore the CDC, ignore even the Trump administration